Spring break, it's the time of year when the rules of our everyday routines don't matter, when we can leave behind the stresses of work and school and embrace the freedom of the moment. It's a time for adventure and excitement, for spontaneous road trips and lazy afternoons basking in the sun. That's exactly what Christine Lazzaro was looking forward to on her spring break. What she didn't expect was that it would be her last adventure and she wouldn't be coming home alive. Let's get into Christine Lazzaro. She was born on August 8, 1972, in Rochester, New York, to her mother Kathleen and her father Frank. She was the middle child of 3 children. She had an older brother, Frank III, named after his dad and grandpa. He was 2 years older than Christine, and she had a little sister, Daniel Lynn, who came 9 years later in 1981. Around 1984, the family moved to a quaint suburb of the city of Rochester called Irondequoit. I hope I'm saying that right, I'm trying here. The population was about 50,000 at the time. It's known to have big city culture but small city charm, and its name means where the land and the water meet. It does border Lake Ontario, just south of Toronto and Ottawa, Canada. Living in this part of New York, the summers are warm, but the winters are freezing, snowy, and windy, and it's partly cloudy all year long. Over the course of the year, the temperatures can vary from 18 degrees Fahrenheit to 80 degrees Fahrenheit, and it's only warm from about June to August. Then, it's back to living in the cold. The snowy season there lasts for 5 months. When Christine, who by the way went by Chrissy, was just a kid, her parents actually split up. They got a divorce. It was hard on her and her family, but a thing about Chrissy is she was always looking on the bright side. She made the best of every situation, and she had always been a daddy's girl, especially after the divorce. Her dad would say that Chrissy was sugar and spice and everything nice. But of course, she was wearing jeans and a baseball cap. He was so proud of his little girl. Despite things not working out with her mom, Frank truly believed he had done everything right with Chrissy, and she was turning into an amazing young lady. He even wrote a poem about Chrissy as she was growing up, and this is what it said: "Somewhere between a girl and a woman, this gift of God stands. She's a rose, a ray of sunshine, joy and laughter wrapped in lace or jeans, a treasure to hold, yet one to share." I was actually really touched by that. As a mom of a young girl myself, I feel like I could write something similar. Daughters can be such a joy to have in your life. Her dad also said that she had an excitement for life that was contagious. It must have been true because she attracted a lot of people her way. Chrissy was very popular among all types of groups of people growing up. She was very fun, and you'd know when she came into a room, mostly because of her looks first. She looked like she could be a model. She had long, wavy brown hair, a big smile, high cheekbones, and green eyes, but it was Chrissy's personality that made her even more beautiful. She was just fun. She had a goofy, silly side. You can tell in this photo, she's all dolled up with friends but making a funny face at the camera. Speaking of being dolled up, Chrissy had dreams of becoming a fashion designer. She was very stylish. She loved doing her hair, her makeup, picking out the perfect outfit, and her eye for detail and unique style made her stand out. She always wanted to make sure that everything was just right. She took pride in her appearance, and her dad encouraged her to go after what she was passionate about. So when it came time to choose a college, Chrissy's choice was to study fashion design at the local Monroe Community College, which was only 15 minutes away from where she lived. By 1993, she was 20 years old. She was going to school, and she was working part-time as a waitress at Galveston's Restaurant and Bar on East Ridge Road. It's right here, 2 minutes away from her house. Very convenient. It had opened in the fall, and Chrissy had been working there for 6 months since its grand opening. Chrissy was perfect for this job. She was very bubbly. She would jump from table to table, enthusiastically welcoming guests as they sat down and trying to make friends with each and every one. Tim Piccolo was her assistant manager at the time, and he'd say that the group of about 20 of them, the employees, they all loved Chrissy. They were like a big family, and she was a hard worker. She had a good reason to be. She was saving up to move into her own apartment, but she didn't plan to be alone. It was going to be a place that she would share with her very best friends, the three girls who knew Chrissy the best: Rita Filipponi, Lauren Marotti, and Kelly Pagoni. They were inseparable for many years. They did everything together. If you saw one of them, you saw all of them because they would go everywhere as a group. That's another thing Christine took pride in: being a good friend, a loyal friend, somebody you could always count on. For her, friends meant the world. I apologize, I accidentally referred to Chrissy as Christy. I know I did it several times throughout this video, and I am so sorry. It usually doesn't happen, but for some reason, Christine, Christy, Chrissy, it all kind of blended together for me in this video. So I am very sorry. I wanted to let you know I am aware of the mistake I made. I hope it does not distract you from this story. By early 1993, Chrissy had just started dating a guy named Carl Jeffries. He played minor league baseball, and she was pretty smitten. Her dad approved as well. He liked the way Carl was very gentlemanlike. He would open the doors for his daughter, and he was very well-mannered, and Frank really liked that about him. Not many guys still do that, by the way. I have one that still does, and I like being treated like a princess. Chivalry is definitely not wasted on me, and Chrissy felt the same. She enjoyed Carl's company, but they were just starting their romance. It wasn't serious just yet, especially since Carl wasn't around that much. He was very busy with his baseball career and spent most of his time in South Carolina practicing with his team, so they didn't really get to see much of each other. But when they both had spare time, they enjoyed spending it together. And that was okay, because Chrissy was very busy herself, juggling college, work, and of course hanging out with the girls. They were planning a really fun trip to Florida for spring break. Their sunny destination, Daytona Beach, Florida. It's the perfect place to enjoy fun in the sun and so much more. Chrissy loved the beach, and she didn't get to go very often because, like I said, the closest one was probably about 300 miles away. So all she did was talk about this trip. She couldn't wait to get her toes in the sand and bake in the sun. She liked getting a nice bronze suntan, and Daytona is like paradise for someone living in colder weather. Snowbirds flock to the Sunshine State to escape the frigid weather up north. It's true that Florida beaches are the perfect location to spend your time looking for that tropical vacation experience, but with so many other, more popular destinations like Miami or Fort Lauderdale, I wondered, how did this small coastal town, that's not even in the middle of the Panhandle, become so popular? Leave it to MTV, of course. In 1986, MTV made its first trip to Daytona Beach with the debut of their new show called MTV Spring Break. It launched at the Plaza Hotel in Daytona Beach. And I remember this, I watched this show and I love researching these cases because I learned so many new facts. This was a live show that MTV used to broadcast for 8 hours a day during spring break. It featured live music performances by famous bands and musicians, plus all the other spring break-related antics: bikini-clad women, alcohol, and lots of hot-looking co-eds. The president of MTV at that time, Doug Herzog, said this about being at spring break. He said, "Spring break is a youth culture event, and we wanted to be part of it for that reason. It makes good sense for us to come down and go live from the center of it, because obviously the people that are there are the kinds of people who watch MTV." And it's true, they were definitely hitting their demographic. By the 1980s, other coastal cities in Florida, like Fort Lauderdale, started to discourage college students from spending their spring and summer breaks on their beaches. It brought a lot of destruction, crime, and chaos to the beautiful cities, while the mayor of Daytona at the time, Larry Kelly, saw this as an opportunity to have his town on the map and invite tourists to his beach instead. It was all about business, but sometimes seeing green can blur your vision to the dangers and downsides of such an open invitation. Daytona actually started to market itself as the destination for spring break for tourists back in 1989. It was a huge moneymaker. A typical spring break in Daytona brought in $160 million back then, in a mere 3-month period, and an estimated 400,000 spring break vacationers, mostly college-aged individuals, who came there to run wild. And I can tell you this, the locals were not fans of this at all. In 1993, the biggest stars at the time were performing on MTV's Spring Break show. Joey Lawrence, I remember him, was the host, and some of the performers were Warren G on his regular tour, Stone Temple Pilots, Eminem, Exhibit, and Dr. Dre, just to name a few. Of course, this was a major event. Just look at this picture. This is a bird's eye view of one of those performances in what they called the band shell. It kind of looks like a castle. And look at all of those people. However, Chrissy and her friends weren't going to Daytona for MTV. They just wanted everything else that came with the spring break capital that MTV had put on the map. Chrissy's trip wasn't until April, which was about a month after MTV was going to be there. It wasn't just the core group of girls making their way 1,000 miles from New York to Daytona. It was a group of 17 of them, guys and girls. The plan? Driving separate vehicles as somewhat of a caravan and getting a bunch of hotel rooms at a really cool hotel that's close to the beach and has everything. They picked the Howard Johnson Hotel on Atlantic Boulevard. It's right on the beach, just steps away from the ocean. Just look at these views. It makes me miss Florida. It's called the Plaza Resort and Spa now, but it's close to everything. Lots of bars, restaurants, clubs, music venues, and of course lots of other spring breakers there for the exact same reasons. The road it's on, A1A, is lined with hotels and gift shops catering to out-of-towners, and it was the perfect choice for Chrissy's group. So, what did Frank think of this? His 20-year-old daughter taking a trip so far away from home? Well, he trusted Chrissy. Even though he said she could be impetuous at times like most young adults are, she was also responsible and firmly grounded. Just 5 weeks prior to the trip, her father was proudly sharing the fact that he was so overjoyed that Chrissy had accepted Christ into her life. Besides that, they were going as a group. What could happen to a group of them? It was as though a piece of home was coming with Chrissy. They'd have one another, they'd be safe. On Friday, April 9th, 1993, the group of 17 Rochester guys and gals arrived at the beautiful Daytona Beach, Florida beaches to spend the next week having the time of their lives. Chrissy and the girls checked into their room on the 13th floor, and I'm sure there was an amazing view. Then they made their way down to A1A to get acquainted with the place they'd call home for the next several days. By the next day, Saturday, they were ready for their first full beach day and party night. They didn't really want to go out the night before because they wanted to be well rested and ready to dance all night long at the most popular nightclub in Daytona, Razzles at 611 Seabreeze Boulevard. They saved their energy for Saturday night, which was also one of the busiest and best nights to go there. It's still a super popular venue today. Their website says Razzles is Daytona Beach's hottest nightclub and has been electrifying Daytona Beach for over 3 decades. There's even a dedicated spring break tab on the website where you can click to see what to expect when visiting Razzles, which they say is the spring break headquarters for over 35 years. It definitely looks like a party to me. It even advertises free drinks until 10 p.m. This place is packed most nights, where you're literally crammed in shoulder to shoulder. Their Facebook page, as of February 22nd of this year, was looking for security guards for this upcoming spring break season, so it's still jamming. The place is huge too. It's over 15,000 square feet. There are a number of different rooms, tables, booths, lounges, VIP sections, bars, and dance floors to choose from. The best part, it was only a 2-minute walk from their hotel, right around the corner, which made it super convenient, especially after drinking all night at Razzles. You can be 18 to enter, but you must be 21 to consume alcohol. Chrissy was only 20, but she brought a fake ID with her from New York so that she could bypass the restrictions. Back in those days, it was really easy to get your hands on a fake ID. Not only that, but they looked completely different than the driver's licenses today. After spending all afternoon at the beach, the girls headed up to their room. They showered, did their hair and makeup, got dressed, and then headed out in their group to Razzles around 9 p.m. as soon as the doors opened. They got a table, ordered their drinks, and started dancing the night away. There's a lot to see and experience in a big nightclub like this. Lots of new people, loud music. Though they did come as a group together, they weren't glued to one another all night. Last call was announced, and the group met back up at the table. That's when they noticed that Chrissy wasn't there. Her friend Rita jumped into action immediately. During the night, The girls had been separated a number of times, but each time they made their way back together, so Rita just figured that Chrissy was somewhere in the crowd. She went looking around, asking friends if they had seen her, and one of their friends from the group said they remembered seeing her around midnight, talking to a guy and leaving. Rita and the girls did remember seeing Chrissy walk off a couple of times, but figured, you know what, she's gonna be back. Of course, when you're busy having fun, time kind of slips away, and you don't always keep track of your adult friends' whereabouts. As a matter of fact, none of them were even concerned about Chrissy leaving. In their minds, she was living it up, having a good time, and maybe continuing the fun elsewhere. No big deal. So they made the 2-minute walk back to their hotel, figuring she would surely show up soon. At some point, the girls drifted off to sleep, and by the next day, Easter morning, on Sunday, April 11th, Chrissy still wasn't back. They didn't have cell phones back then, so they couldn't reach out by text or call her. There was no social media or Find My Device apps. All you could do was wait. So that's what they did. They were going to wait until Chrissy made her way back to the room. The girls asked some of their other Rochester friends if Chrissy had crashed with them in their hotel rooms, but she had not. They knew their friend, and they figured, you know what, she's probably having a little too much fun with the guy she met the night before. If something was wrong, they figured Chrissy would have called the hotel by now. They were a little surprised that Chrissy would choose a guy she didn't know over spending her vacation with her best friends. But they figured, what could they do, right? It was her choice. They weren't going to wait around and let the sun go down without getting out there on the beach and enjoying every minute of it. So, they left the room and headed out to the sand, assuming they'd see Chrissy anytime now, prancing down the shoreline with a story to tell them about last night. They still really were not that concerned at all, but they should have been. What Chrissy's best friends didn't know was that earlier that same morning, around 7:06 a.m., 30 miles southwest in a sleepy bedroom community called DeBary. I've heard that phrase before, but I never knew what it meant. A bedroom town refers to a small town tucked away from the city. It's a place where people move for cheaper rent, but it's close enough to commute into town for work. They live there basically just to sleep, and they spend most of their time elsewhere. Makes sense. I'd never heard of this town before either. It's located in Volusia County, about 45 minutes inland from the hotel where the girls were staying. And this area is definitely like night and day compared to Daytona Beach. Much more residential, rural in nature, spread out with way less going on. That Easter morning, a resident was on his way to work when he saw a flash of something white in the grass along a very busy road called Turkston Drive. It was out of place enough for him to stop and take a closer look, so he did. From his vantage point, he thought he could see a woman lying on the ground. He raced to the nearest convenience store to call 911. Officers made their way out to the road just outside a wooded residential neighborhood, and sure enough, they saw something that appeared to be a deceased human body. A few minutes later, Officer Greg Arthur, a crime scene investigator from the Volusia County Sheriff's Office, got a phone call. They told him to go out to the scene. It was the supervisor of the major case unit that handles homicides in that area. Officer Arthur had been to many crime scenes. He had seen his fair share of very gruesome murders, but he had to compose himself when he arrived on the scene in DeBary that holiday morning in 1993. Seeing her just lying there, curled up on her side, the strikingly beautiful woman, there was just something about it, like a sleeping beauty frozen in that moment. Lifeless, yet with the air of potential she could have had in life, had she had the chance to live it. The officer was overcome with emotion. This was someone's child. He had so many questions, but he had to pull it together so that he could find the answers. The first thing he noticed was the blood. It contrasted against the white baseball jersey that she was wearing. She had it on, in this picture, with a pair of shorts taken the night before. Hours earlier, she was smiling and laughing with friends, and now it was soaked with her blood. It was pooling underneath her head. She still had her purse in her hand. What was she doing on this road, and who would have wanted to harm her? It was clear that she had been shot, and it appeared the wounds were on her head, but there were no other distinctive marks on her body. Could she have been walking here at night and been ambushed by someone? There was a very noticeable and fresh tire track right next to her body in the grass. So Officer Arthur used a cement-like substance to make an impression of this track. While the coroner arrived to transport the woman's remains to the medical examiner's office, they also recovered a spent shell casing, which was located around 4 feet away from where she had been lying. Since her purse was collected at the scene, they were able to look inside and get their first lead, a clue about her identity. But it wasn't crystal clear who she was because they found 2 New York State identification cards, one with information about a 26-year-old woman, and the other for a woman named Christine Lazzaro, who was only 20. Now, Officer Arthur thinks he knows who their victim is, the young girl, the 20-year-old, in town for spring break. It doesn't take long for him to match her face to the younger woman's ID, and it makes sense. She would have wanted to have this fake ID so she could drink, especially because she was on this vacation from out of state. It's not uncommon at all. Plus, there was a big clue on the top of her hands, stamps from a nightclub. But she's so far from anywhere with a happening nightlife, so it's a mystery how she ended up this far inland. The officer knows she was most likely staying in Daytona. Now, he has the dreadful task of notifying next of kin about the devastating reality that their loved one is dead. Frank was the first one to get that call. It was unbelievable to him. He kept saying no, no, no. That's all he could get out of his mouth. There wasn't anything else to say. It was going to take him a while to come to terms with what the officer was telling him, and they still did not have much information to provide. However, Frank was able to give them some information. He confirmed what Arthur had suspected. Chrissy was on a trip to Daytona Beach with her friends. He gave the officer the name and location of the hotel they were staying at. Chrissy's brother didn't get the chance to hear about his sister's death from a loved one. He saw it on the news. He said he would never forget seeing the EMTs loading a body bag into an ambulance, and that had to be extremely devastating. I cannot begin to imagine the pain of someone you love dying tragically, but to find out about it on TV like that, I can't help but feel so sorry for him. Meanwhile, back in Daytona, it was close to 5 p.m. when the trio made their way back to the hotel room from spending the day at the beach. They had to be back to get ready for dinner reservations that they had made before the trip. They had planned a nice Easter dinner at a fancy restaurant. But where is Chrissy at this point? The girls start to talk about how they're feeling in regards to the fact that they feel like Chrissy has just abandoned them and all their plans on this planned vacation. It was a holiday, and they were all looking forward to this night. Chrissy had helped pick out the restaurant, planned the event, and she even set out a special dress. It was hanging in the closet. So what's going on? What could be more important than this plan with her closest friends? They just didn't understand it, and it started to annoy them. They were just trying to make sense of it all. I mean, they weren't thinking that their best friend was dead, that's for sure. They thought that she had opted to spend time with someone else. Detective Jody Palermo was assigned as the lead detective on the case. He didn't understand what a spring breaker in Daytona would be doing in DeBary, nearly an hour away from the beaches, and why she was just left there, not even covered up. It was as though she was dumped out of the side of a car door and just left there, thrown away like trash, and that was heartbreaking. What could she have done to make someone do this to her? Well, the only lead he has is the information given to them by Chrissy's father. So they made their way to the Howard Johnson's hotel, looking for her friends. Time is not on their side. Those first 24 to 48 hours are crucial, and it had already been 16 hours by the time they set out to find her friends. Kelly, Lauren, and Rita had made it to dinner, but there was just this eerie feeling around them. Rita had this wave of fear come over her at one point. She couldn't just sit there anymore enjoying this night without Chrissy. She turned to the other two girls and said, "This is serious. Something isn't right. Something's wrong. We gotta go." And they left to go back to their hotel. That gut feeling was right. When they got to their door, they saw a business card in their hotel room door. It was from Detective Palermo. At this point, they felt a little relieved. But then it turned to concern, like, what did Chrissy get herself into now? The girls were thinking she got arrested, maybe for having a fake ID or something worse. They didn't have much time to put it together though, because just as they stepped inside, the investigators were back at their hotel room door. Without hesitation, one of the investigators pulled them together and said, "Girls, there's no easy way to say this. Christine is dead." That's unbelievable. It was so difficult for them to hear this. That is not what they were expecting. All three of them just stood there, speechless. They were in shock. Their minds went completely blank. They didn't know what was going on. Rita actually thought the detective might have been speaking a different language. It sounded foreign to her because it wasn't making sense. But when she looked towards Kelly and Lauren, she knew and just broke down. All three of them broke down, hysterically crying. There were so many emotions and thoughts racing through their heads: shock, guilt, sadness, and then the realization that they'd never see Chrissy again. They'd never hear her laugh or ask for her style advice. They were so young and alone, far from home, and now knowing their best friend was never going back home with them, it was a lot for them to take in. But there was no time to grieve in that moment, because detectives needed the girls to pull themselves together to help them understand what happened to their friend. The girls explained the last time they saw Chrissy. It was the night before at Razzles. They didn't see her leave, but friends of theirs said that she left the club with a dark-skinned male. He could have been Hispanic or African American, but he wasn't someone from their group. However, they did say this: Carl, the guy Chrissy had been seeing, matched that description. He was African American, but he was supposed to be in North Carolina. Still, it was only a 6-hour drive, so could he have surprised her and come to Daytona? By 7 p.m., the autopsy report had come back. The manner of death was homicide, and the cause of death was 2 gunshot wounds to the head. There were no signs of forced intercourse or any other physical harm to Chrissy's body. No defensive wounds, nothing. However, the medical examiner did find something on Chrissy's body, a clue left behind. Remember the stamp I mentioned on her hand from Razzles? The medical examiner could still see the R on one of her hands. But on the other hand, there was another stamp, one that her friends didn't have. It wasn't from Razzles. It was smudged, but he was able to make out 3 numbers, 701. That's the name of another hotspot in Daytona Beach, 701 South, a nightclub inside the Texan Hotel on Atlantic Avenue. Present day, the hotel is called the Harbor Beach Resort. It's about a 6-minute drive from Razzles, or about a 29-minute walk. So now investigators know Chrissy wasn't just at Razzles that night, which means the guy she left with might not have been the last person to see her alive. She could have met up with a lot of people. This case is becoming very confusing because there doesn't seem to be a motive. It's hard to imagine why someone would want Chrissy dead. They do have somewhat of a description to go off of, so now they can canvass the area where the body was found, plus the 2 nightclubs, hoping that someone saw or heard something the night before. Maybe someone would recognize Chrissy and remember who she was with, or if anything was out of the ordinary, if there was anything suspicious or wrong with her or anyone she was with. Then they get a lead. One of the servers at Razzles says she 100% remembers Chrissy. She even told detectives what Chrissy was wearing that night. "Oh, I remember her. She was wearing a white baseball jersey, had long dark wavy hair, and shorts on. She was with a black guy. They were sitting right at my bar together, right here, and he was wearing a dark blue shirt, jeans, and a baseball cap." The server said they were having a very good time, very close, they looked like a couple. The guy was very polite, buying her drinks. Everything looked normal. Wow, okay. So this really did sound like it could be Carl. Maybe he came to surprise her after all. So they get the credit card receipt from the server, and when they look, they see the guy signing with the initials BC. That's definitely not Carl's initials. The server pulls up even more receipts, and they see that the full name is Brent Cole. So they contact the credit card company, pull up all of Brent's information, and find out he's a college student from Minnesota. They figure this guy was probably vacationing in Daytona, just like so many other students that week. Now they need to track him down ASAP, because this could be Chrissy's killer. Meanwhile, back in the neighborhood where Chrissy's body was found, A resident said she remembered hearing a bang around 4:30 in the morning, followed by the sound of a vehicle racing away. She returned from Easter Sunday service later that afternoon, and that's when she saw the crime scene tape. She connected it to the gunshots from earlier that morning. But another resident said gunshots were super common in the early morning. It's a rural area, and hunters are out there shooting vermin. It wasn't much to go on. They were just trying to create a timeline, tentatively saying that Chrissy could have been murdered around 4 a.m. By the next day, Rita, Lauren, and Kelly had decided to take the 1,000-mile trip back home, ending their spring break vacation early. They couldn't cope with Chrissy's death all the way in Florida, far from their loved ones. Of course, their families were worried about them. They felt so guilty about not being there to protect their friend. They worried about Chrissy's family and the pain that they were going through. They just had to get back in town. It was equally as hard to leave, though, because this was the last place that they spent time with Chrissy, and they knew she would never be going back home, not alive anyway. Frank definitely wasn't taking a while. I don't know him personally, of course not, but from the interviews and everything I read and watched, he reminded me of my own father. He couldn't help but want to get down there to Florida himself and start looking for the man who killed his little girl. But then he said to himself, "What am I going to do? I'm just going to go door to door and say, 'Did you kill my daughter?'" So he realized this wasn't logical. He wouldn't be much help. It was so hard to sit back and do nothing. He was angry, sad, and anxious to know what happened to Chrissy. Investigators were about to knock on Brent Cole's apartment door at this time. Without warning, they had already made their way to Minnesota. They couldn't wait to get a good look at this guy who was last seen with Chrissy Lazzaro. When he came to the door, he was well-dressed, clean-cut, polite, not what they were initially expecting to see. He agreed to speak with them. They informed him that they were there to investigate a murder, and he looked really confused, like, why in the world would these guys be coming all the way here? This is the woman we're looking for, Chrissy Lazzaro. And of course, when someone hears that they're being interviewed about a murder, it makes them nervous. In Brent's case, confused. He's like, "I don't have anything to do with that." He's looking at the picture, and he denies knowing Chrissy or anything about what happened to her. He was in Daytona. He says he was on spring break and did go to Razzle's nightclub. He also had drinks with an attractive brunette that night, but she's alive and well, Jennifer Weathers, his girlfriend. The detectives weren't going to just take him at his word, but he goes one step forward and says, "Look, here's a picture of that night of me and my girlfriend." When Detective Palermo looked at that picture of Jennifer, his jaw dropped. He could not believe the resemblance to Chrissy. It was unbelievable. They could have been twins, and they were wearing the exact same outfit that night. Wow. Jennifer was there to speak to the detective herself, and she explained that they were there on that Saturday night, having drinks at the bar together, but they didn't see Chrissy, and they went back to their hotel room together, alone. So now, everything that the detectives thought they knew about Chrissy leaving the club wasn't accurate. Her friends most likely caught a quick glimpse of Jennifer and Brent, not Chrissy and another guy, leaving together. But she did go to the 701 club that night without her friends. How'd she get there, though, and who was she with? The friends were re-interviewed, and though they were given this new information, they held strong to the fact they knew they saw Chrissy leave with a dark-skinned man that night, and they knew it was her. Regardless of whether there was another couple that looked similar, they definitely saw Chrissy leave with a similar-looking guy. The detectives went to the 701 club, and they asked the staff if they recognized Chrissy. They brought a picture with them and showed it to all of the people, especially the bouncer, the manager at the door. The manager recognized Chrissy right away, and there's a reason. It was because of the guy she was with that night. He was giving the bouncer issues. As soon as they walked up to the door, his ID didn't quite look right, and the bouncer wanted to ask him a few questions. This guy kind of took offense to it. He snapped back at the bouncer. It's the manager's job to keep her patrons safe, and she looked at Chrissy and could tell she was nervous and scared. At that point, The manager made a mental note of this guy's appearance in case anything else were to happen inside the club that night. He was muscular, medium built, he had high cheekbones, dark skin, a mustache, and what she described as having a very distinctive Arsenio Hall-style haircut. Now, if you're not familiar, he was a famous comedian and talk show host back then, and to me it's like a high flat top fade. Tell me what you think. Here's the picture. As you can see, it's unique and distinctive. You'd definitely remember it if you saw it. So now that they have this feature to go on, they interviewed the staff members from the 701 South Club, and they recalled seeing Chrissy and the guy having a great time together. He was a complete gentleman. She definitely wasn't there against her will. But since they had seen him get kinda loud with the bouncer, who knows what he was capable of? Maybe he had a short fuse, and something happened after he had a few drinks in him, and they left the bar. The manager was able to provide a sketch artist with every detail that she could recall, and they created a composite and started taking it all over the town, asking if anyone had seen this man with Chrissy. No luck, so they released the sketch to the media. Now, this is the one I was able to dig up from old newspaper articles. The ones that I saw on shows were completely different, so I truly believe that this is the one they handed out and plastered all over the news. And it started to bring in a bunch of tips. One was from a guy who said he had seen this man. He frequented strip clubs, according to this guy, up and down the coast of Florida, last seen in Orange County. So this is the biggest lead that they've had at this time. Investigators go and they hand out flyers with Chrissy's picture and this guy's picture to clubs, regular clubs, bars, and even strip clubs from Daytona to Orange County, which was about an hour away towards the Orlando area. But they still do not get any leads. On October 17th, a week after Chrissy's body was found, she had been sent back to her family in New York, and they were finally able to lay her to rest. They had a beautiful memorial service at Pittsford Community Church, and over 500 people came out to mourn the loss of Christine Lazzaro. Childhood friends, college friends, family, relatives, co-workers, they piled into the church to pay their respects. Frank was blown away. He said, "Holy cow," when he looked at the crowd. However, Chrissy's mom, Kathleen, declined to participate in the service. A family representative said she was not ready to talk about what happened, so she sat at the back of the church. She was too overwhelmed by her daughter's death, and she wanted to grieve privately. There were about 20 people who spoke about their memories of Chrissy and what she meant to them. Frank said that Chrissy was trusting and curious. She embraced life and explored it. But he had a message for everyone, something he thought Chrissy would have wanted them to hear, a word of wisdom and caution so that her loss was not in vain. He said that she would have wanted her friends to learn from her murder. His message was, don't drink and drive, don't do drugs, and don't make hasty decisions, with an emphasis on the last one. Frank said, I know for a fact she would say, use the buddy system. This was in reference to the fact that Chrissy broke away from her friends. She was left alone. If someone would have been with her, if someone would have been watching, if they would have used the buddy system to alert one another of their plans to leave and not have left anyone behind, she might still be there. Her dad was haunted by his daughter's voice. He imagined her calling out to him in her final moments, saying, Daddy, Teddy, help me, and knowing that he couldn't be there for her. That just broke my heart. It's gut-wrenching. A friend of Chrissy's named Brad Denker didn't want to speak at the actual funeral, but he did send a poem into the newspaper that he wrote about Chrissy, and I wanted to read it to you. I remember a face of beauty with eyes that would grab your heart and a smile that shined like a star in a blackened sky. Sounds of laughter and kindness that could enchant a room and bestow happiness on those around her. He ended with, we love you, Chrissy. She was very loved and lost way too soon. Detectives were determined to find the person who did this to her, but every lead that they had went cold. That's when they turned to someone more closer to home, Chrissy's boyfriend, Carl. He did somewhat match the description, and he was only 6 hours away at the time, so they tracked him down to ask him about his whereabouts the week Chrissy was in Florida. His coach made a statement with proof of a roster that showed that Carl was in South Carolina playing a game the night that Chrissy was murdered, But still, there were hours after that were unaccounted for, so they still needed to speak with Carl himself. And it was a good thing they did, because when they do, they get their next lead. They fly out to South Carolina to meet with him, and he's visibly distraught. Just like Frank mentioned, Carl is very polite. He cooperated fully. Unbelievably, he tells the detectives he spoke to Chrissy the night she was murdered. No, he wasn't in Daytona, but she called him sometime in the middle of the night. He was asleep when he answered, and he estimated it was between midnight and 2 am tour. She sounded just fine and bubbly, happy. She told him she was having a great time, but she missed him and wanted to reach out and say hello. He said they chatted for about 30 minutes. Detectives asked if he could tell where she was calling from, and he said he was sleeping and there wasn't much he could say. He didn't hear a lot of loud noise in the background. It wasn't a bar, but he could hear a TV on, and he didn't hear anyone else. Back then, in order to make a long-distance phone call, especially when you're out of town, you bought what's called a calling card. It basically has minutes on it, and you type in a number before the number that you want to call and be connected to, and that's how you pay for long-distance charges. While Chrissy had one of these, they traced the calling card, and they see that late-night call. It was at 1:30 in the morning, but they can't trace where it came from. But the 701 South Club is in the Texan Hotel, and the timeline would match up. If Chrissy left Razzles around midnight and made her way to the Texan, she could have placed that call either before going to that club or afterward. Maybe she was with someone that was staying at the Texan and she was in their room. It had been 10 days, and they were still no closer to knowing what happened to Chrissy. And that's when Chrissy's friends gave detectives some information that they thought was not that important in the beginning, but maybe now it would be. Remember the first night the girls got there and they kinda laid low? Well, Chrissy kinda didn't. She went down to the hotel bar all by herself to get a drink alone. And when she came back, she told the girls that she met a really hot bartender named Scott Henson. Now, the girls had already mentioned this to the police, but when they said he was white, they ruled him out because it wasn't a priority to check on since she was seen with a dark-skinned man leaving the club that night, or so they thought. Chrissy's friends said that she and Scott had exchanged numbers. They planned to meet up sometime that week. But Chrissy couldn't wait. She decided to go out with him that night after her shift ended. However, she came back alive and told her friends that they just walked down the beach and talked. They go to speak with Scott at the hotel bar, and he admits, "Yeah, I went out on a late-night walk with Chrissy." When they show him a picture, that's when it finally hits him that she's the spring breaker they found murdered on Easter morning. He tells investigators he was not even in town that day. He left early Saturday morning, a day before her body was found, to celebrate the holiday with his family out in Georgia. They confirmed his alibi. By now, all the locals in Daytona Beach are scared. Chrissy's death happened the last week of spring break when many of the students that flocked to this area were finally leaving, and her murder started a debate, including the mayor, who was now realizing that Daytona's reputation as a place to go and let loose and party till you pass out with uncontrollable crowds was really damaging the city's image. He felt it put an undue burden on the police and the community workers who had to clean up all the mess that was left behind. But others in town who wanted their town to thrive pointed out that it brought in way too much money to worry about that, and it would make up for all the troubles that the spring breakers may bring. They pointed out there hadn't been a murder in 13 years. Sure, there were petty crimes and hotels got trashed, but they argued, did anyone turn up dead until now? No. Well, an officer named A.J. Tolley from the Daytona Beach Police Department said, "Listen, the reports of men forcing women to have sex with them against their will and other indecent incidents were being reported more and more. In just March alone, there were a dozen reports. It doesn't look good for the city, but more importantly, these are victims and they're coming forward. And yes, someone did die." Just 2 days afterward, there was already a headline in the front page of a local newspaper that said, "Time to de-emphasize spring break." It looks like the mayor got more than he bargained for when all he saw was dollar signs chasing after those MTV viewers. The case they were referring to, that happened 13 years before. This was the murder of Carol Ann Barrett. She was an 18-year-old from Ohio who was on spring break in Daytona in March of 1980. Just like Chrissy, she had dreamed of spending her vacation in the sun. She also traveled with a group of 8 of her friends, and they all stayed at the Treasure Island Inn Hotel on the beach, just like the one Chrissy's friends were in. In Carol's case, she was partying in her hotel room with her group of friends when she and a guy decided to leave and go to a store down the street. When they were going down the hotel hallway, a man stopped them at gunpoint and forced them to open their hotel room door. He wasn't expecting to see all those people inside, but he didn't care. He proceeded to tell all of them, guys and girls, to strip down. Then he robbed them all and tried to kidnap a girl named Pam, but she started to scream, so he took poor Carol instead because she was calm and quiet. Then he forced the rest of them, the whole group, onto the balcony, where he locked the sliding glass door behind him. They were stuck out there screaming. No one was coming to help them. So one boy climbed onto a neighboring balcony and was able to knock on the door and get the people inside to call the cops. Unfortunately, it was too late. Carol's barely clothed body was later found on the side of the road, 100 miles away in Jacksonville. She too was shot in the head, like Chrissy. This case is still unsolved despite the fact that a number of her friends had seen this man who took her and could give a clear description to the police. Both Chrissy and Carol had execution-style deaths. These are the type where there's no time to fight. You don't even realize you're going to be harmed. You're defenseless, and you're not expecting it to happen. It's quick, but it's no less horrifying. Now, there's one more similarity between these two cases. They were both cold. 4 months go by, and Chrissy's family is desperate for answers. They put out a $100,000 reward for any information that would lead them to her killer. No one comes forward. By September, Chrissy's brother Frank finally makes his first public statement. He was at his aunt's table, talking to reporters for the very first time. There were pictures of Chrissy all over the house, even one from the night she was killed, wearing that white baseball jersey. Frank said, "Why couldn't I protect her?" That's something that bothered him. She was all alone. His little sister didn't have a chance. The fact he couldn't be there to save her haunted him. He told reporters that the pair were always there for each other. It was as though they knew what the other was feeling or when they were in trouble. Frank was 23 at the time and a student at the University of Rochester. The loss of his sister had torn him apart. He said it was the hardest thing he ever had to go through. She was a friend, not only a sister. He described it as crippling, like a part of him was gone. Frank wanted to make one thing clear: it wasn't Chrissy's fault that she was killed. Many people had questioned why she left without her friends at night and placed the blame on her. Frank said that tarnished his sister's memory and that she was portrayed poorly by the media as an underage partier, a boozer, and even a drug addict, which she wasn't. He said she was a typical 20-year-old, doing what everyone else her age was doing. Victim blaming often occurs. She should have done this. She could have done that. Frank acknowledged that it's easy to judge, but insisted, "We don't know what position she was in. We don't know what we would have done in a similar situation." He emphasized that we can only learn from these situations, and that is one of his goals in telling these stories. It is not Chrissy's fault that she was murdered. The only person that's responsible for that is the evil person who chose to commit that crime. She wasn't a bad person. As a matter of fact, she was someone who was always there for others. She was the type to never say goodbye without saying she loved you. Frank recounted a time when he was really sick, and Chrissy was by his side all night. She even fell asleep on the floor next to his bed, taking care of him. His message was, "Don't take things for granted. Don't take the people you love for granted." He said that the relationships he has now are treasures he values more than ever because you don't know how long they will last. He also mentioned he was trying to heal and that he thinks Chrissy would have told him to go live his life with the energy and excitement that she did. He was trying, and he ended with, "Someday, I hope I can do that." It's bittersweet, and I think it's a great takeaway. We don't know how much time we have with anyone else, so cherish every moment. In this case, those moments turned into months and then years, and Chrissy's family and investigators held on to the hope that one day, with advanced technology or some other method, her murder would be solved. It wouldn't be until 2010 that someone who was keeping a secret about Chrissy's murder would finally be compelled to reveal the truth. 17 years after Chrissy was found dead, a call came into the Volusia County Sheriff's Office. It was April 20th, 2010. Warden Burl Kane from Louisiana State Penitentiary was on the other end. This penitentiary is better known as Angola. You might have heard that name before. It's the name of the slave plantation the prison is built on. It's a very famous prison, and the warden there at the time held the key to solving the case, a key to an inmate's cell. They were housing 38-year-old Romalis Gordon, who was serving 2 back-to-back life sentences for being caught on CCTV robbing Lucky's Truck Stop Casino in Louisiana and murdering 2 women execution style. Assistant manager Schaefer Francis, a 29-year-old mother of 2, and a 64-year-old woman named Brenda Granny Robertson, who was an unarmed security guard. Romalis was a regular there in 2006 when the crime occurred. Schaefer, the 29-year-old he gunned down, was a hard worker who never complained about her shifts at Lucky's. She was the first to volunteer her time to help others and always had a great attitude, according to her friends and family. She was willing to take on extra tasks, and everyone that knew her said she was also an amazing mother who was always by her daughter's side. Now, she was gone. During her time as the assistant manager of this small casino, Schaefer monitored the flow of money from poker machines that were emptied by their employees and distributed that money to players as change. Math and numbers were her thing. This was her passion, and she enjoyed her work. In her free time, she spent time watching movies with her boyfriend. Romalis Gordon's other victim, Brenda Robertson, the 64-year-old, weighed less than 100 pounds, but was the one who always helped Lucky's stay trouble-free. There hadn't been any trouble until this double murder occurred. Schaefer and Brenda had a great working relationship and loved one another like family. No one at Lucky's casino had ever felt threatened or unsafe, so these murders were a shock to everyone. The prosecution in this case was initially planning to seek the death penalty against Romalis. However, he pleaded guilty to Brenda and Schaefer's murders in exchange for 2 life sentences for first-degree murder in 2007. While he was serving that sentence, he heard a sermon from a visiting pastor named Jim Savala from the Brooklyn Tabernacle in New York City. He visited Angola once a year, and this sermon inspired Romalis to write a letter to the warden. It was laced with biblical references, like this one where he said, "How can I praise God on one hand, and in my heart and mind I know what pain I've caused someone for years and years. God sent me here for a reason, and until I confess what I have done, I cannot be freed from the belly of the whale." He said in his letter that the programs at the prison made him realize that you can't run from your past. He wrote, "All my family problems and sickness were because of my secret. I want to confess what I have done. I have all the details that only the murderer would have. I want to confess now. Now I'm going to hurt my own family by telling you the truth." But at the end he wrote, "Give the family closure. It's the right thing to do." That closure came in the form of confessing to the warden that he killed Christine Lazzaro. Romalis told details to the warden about the murder that had never been released to the public, like that the shots were fired at close range, one to her cheek and the other above her ear. The warden relayed all this information to the police department, and they ran his name. They discovered that Romalis Gordon had been arrested on a trespassing charge just 40 miles from DeBary, where Chrissy's body was dumped on the side of the road just 2 months after her murder. When they arrested him, they confiscated a .38 caliber weapon, which was the same caliber used on Chrissy. Naturally, they tried to find this gun. They wanted to see if it was still in evidence. However, it had been so long, and because they didn't know it was connected to any other crimes, especially a bigger crime, it had been destroyed. Detectives flew out to Louisiana to speak with Romalis to make sure he was telling the truth. Right away, he became very emotional, and the detectives did not think he was putting on a show. By this time, The inmate worked as an orderly at the prison and was in charge of making sure that other inmates who had committed disciplinary offenses were on their best behavior. Romalis had a really good conduct report and truly seemed to want to just get the secret off his chest. Once they believed they had their man, they had a lot of questions, the biggest one being, why? He explained that he was 21 years old at the time and had moved to Orlando about 4 months before the murder. He was on the run from police in Louisiana. One night, he was having fun hanging out in Daytona for spring break when he ran into Chrissy at Razzles. They started chatting and were hitting it off. He really liked her, and they were having a great time. To impress her, he lied about what he did for a living, claiming to be a rich record producer. They left and went to the 701 Club to grab some food, then headed to his motel room out in DeBary. According to him, they had sex together, and he had also done a lot of cocaine and had been drinking all night long. Chrissy made a phone call while he went to the bathroom to do some more drugs. When he came out, he saw Chrissy going through some of his things, which included a couple of his fake IDs. He had warrants for his arrest and was using an alias at the time. When he saw her doing this, he became super paranoid, believing she was going to turn him in. Initially, he claimed he was just going to drop her back off in Daytona Beach, but instead, he freaked out. According to him, on the way to drop her off, he told her to get out of the car, and that's when he ended up taking her life instead. It's a completely senseless motive. There was never any indication that Christine ever had intercourse with him or with anyone before her murder. So I'm not really sure I believe that this is exactly how things went down. If I were to give my perspective, it would be mere speculation. We will never know the truth. But I find it hard to believe because it reminds me of the Samantha Josephson case, where there was a big struggle, unlike in this case. Romalis wrote a letter to Chrissy's dad asking for forgiveness, which was something that wasn't easy for Frank to read or come to terms with. How could he forgive the man who had callously taken his innocent daughter's life? But he's a Christian and thought about it. He realized he wasn't the ultimate judge, so he was able to extend forgiveness to this man. However, Chrissy's friends did not feel the same way, and I tend to side more with her friends on this one. After hearing that someone had confessed to Chrissy's murder, it brought them back to that day in the hotel room when they first got the news. Rita said she hates Romalis. It doesn't matter if he's sorry. He doesn't bring Chrissy back, and he doesn't fix anything. Kelly expressed gratitude that he confessed, but believes he should pay for taking away their friend and for taking someone's life, and he will pay, he is paying. A year later, on May 25, 2011, Romalis Gordon pleaded guilty to Christine's murder. He was given yet another life sentence in Angola prison. This was a case that Detective Palermo, who was now retired by that time, had never forgotten. He was so happy that the family could get closure and to know that Chrissy's killer was behind bars forever. He doesn't think this case would have ever been solved. They put so much work into it, but without this confession, they probably would never have known who killed Chrissy.
Gullibility, naivety, and being overly trusting. These traits can be dangerous, sometimes costing a person their life. Yet we all have moments when we want to believe in miracles, that childhood dreams can still come true. When something you've longed for seems so close, you can almost touch it. Caution, common sense, and even self-preservation can take a back seat. It's exactly this vulnerability that criminals prey upon. The case of a young French woman named Elodie Morel in 2005 shocked the country with its brutality and inhumanity. What made it even more horrifying was the cold indifference of ordinary people who knew about her captivity and impending fate, but chose silence for a quick profit. This is a story about how not all dreams come true, and why you can't blindly trust someone who promises to make a fairy tale come to life. Who was Elodie Morel? Elodie Morel was born on February 18, 1976, in Marseille. From a young age, she had a striking, almost angelic appearance. As she grew older, Elodie blossomed into a stunning beauty, with many suggesting she belonged on TV or on the cover of glossy magazines. As a teenager, she became obsessed with the idea of becoming a model. But coming from a humble family, no one took her dream seriously. In the 90s, Elodie sent her photos to various modeling agencies several times but never got a response. After graduating high school, she went to college, married a classmate named Sylvain at 22, and had a son by the age of 25. It seemed like she had let go of her dream of becoming a model for good. By 2005, Elodie was working as a sales associate at a trendy clothing store in downtown Marseille. She frequently received compliments and noticed the admiring or jealous looks thrown her way. At 29, she still had a perfect figure, beautiful facial features, and could easily pass for someone in her early 20s. Even though Elodie never fully gave up on her dream of becoming a model, she no longer talked about it, convinced her time had passed. But in April 2005, she filled out an online application, attached her best photos, and indicated that she was still interested in pursuing a modeling career. The response didn't take long, but the enticing offer from a fashion photographer turned out to be an invitation to slow, agonizing death. A trap for the trusting. Around 2 weeks after she posted her profile online, Elodie received a flattering and tempting offer. She could become the new face of the famous English luxury car company, Rolls-Royce. The contract offered a payment of €1,000 per day for a photo shoot, but to finalize the deal, she had to meet with the photographer and do a test shoot. The meeting was set for May 2nd at a bar in the town of Aigues-Mortes. Thrilled, Elodie shared the news with her husband. Although he was skeptical, he didn't argue. Early that morning, the young mother left her son with her parents, got in her car, and headed to the arranged location. She planned to stay in Aigues-Mortes for 3 days and had already booked a hotel room. That evening, Elodie called her husband to tell him she was on her way to the meeting and feeling nervous. Sylvain wished her luck and asked her to call as soon as she could. It would be the last time he ever spoke to his wife. The last meeting. Elodie arrived at the bar as planned and sat at a table on the terrace, waiting to meet the female photographer she had supposedly been emailing with. But instead, about 10 minutes later, a man in his mid-40s joined her at the table. He introduced himself as the photographer's assistant, explaining that he'd been sent to meet her and pick out locations for the shoot scheduled for the next day. Having no real experience in the modeling world, Elodie didn't sense anything suspicious and took him at his word. The man looked professional, spoke convincingly, and seemed to know all the details from her previous conversations with the photographer. Their chat flowed easily, focusing on Elodie's potential career. In her mind, she was already envisioning herself gracing the covers of popular magazines and thinking about how she would spend the money she would earn. Around 9 p.m., as darkness had fully set in, the man suggested they go scout for the perfect location for the next day's shoot. Aigues-Mortes, a charming medieval town, is filled with picturesque towers, fortresses, and chapels, plenty of spots for a stunning photo shoot. Excited and still unsuspecting of any danger, Elodie left the bar with her new acquaintance and got into his car. She was never seen alive again. What's chilling is that another man who knew the perpetrator personally and had heard about his vile intentions witnessed the entire interaction. He tried to intervene, but unfortunately, his efforts were in vain. A frightened informant. That same evening, on May 2nd, a call came into the Aigues-Mortes police station. A frantic man claimed that a young woman was in grave danger and something needed to be done immediately. He didn't know the name of the potential victim or where she might have been taken, but he was sure there wasn't much time to act. The caller was 63-year-old Dominique Tarasco, a nightclub owner who often worked as an informant for the police, providing them with confidential information. He said that earlier that night, he had seen an acquaintance of his, Guillaume Mengot, at the bar. Mengot had ties to the criminal underworld and was known to be a cruel and dangerous man. The previous day, Mengot had bragged about meeting a naive, pretty girl online, whom he planned to kidnap and sell to a brothel in Spain for a hefty price. However, starting the search was difficult. The police had no solid leads, no name, no location, but they knew time was of the essence. By the next morning, they had a name: Elodie Morel. Her worried family contacted the police, reporting that she had been missing since the previous evening and that her phone was off. They explained that she had left for a photo shoot in another town and then simply vanished. At first, the police didn't connect this disappearance to the call from the informant. They suspected Elodie might have run off with a lover, but her family insisted that she would never abandon her young son or disappear without a word. The search for Elodie didn't begin until 3 days after she had gone missing. Precious time wasted. Tragically, Elodie was still alive for 2 of those days, held captive in a house in Aigues-Mortes, where she was tortured and abused while her captors decided how to get rid of her. Interrogation of the witness and arrest of the suspects. On May 5, 2005, the lead investigator handling Elodie Morel's disappearance began to suspect that she was the same mysterious woman in danger that the informant had warned about. Dominique was summoned to the station to give a formal statement, and when shown a photo of Elodie, he immediately confirmed that she was the woman he had seen 3 days earlier in the bar with Guillaume Mangot. When asked where he thought Mangot might be holding the victim, Dominique mentioned he'd heard something about an empty nightclub on the north side of town that had recently shut down. A police team set up a stakeout at the location, and by that evening, they apprehended 48-year-old Guillaume Mangot and 53-year-old Richard Lignier as they arrived at the building. The role of the second man in this crime was still unclear and required further investigation. During a search of Mangot, police found Elodie Morel's credit card in one of his pockets, leaving no doubt about his involvement in her disappearance. Both men were brought to the station for questioning, though Lignier was released after a few hours due to a lack of evidence against him. Lignier lived with his family on the outskirts of town and had a friendly relationship with Guillaume, but had never been in trouble with the law himself. The first story. Initially, Mangot claimed he didn't know Elodie and had simply stolen her credit card. According to his first version of events, he was at the bar on May 2nd when he noticed an attractive, well-dressed woman. He assumed she must have money and decided to rob her. Guillaume sat down at Elodie's table, complimented her, and offered to buy her a coffee. She mentioned she was waiting for someone but didn't ask him to leave. They chatted briefly, and at some point he managed to swipe her credit card from the purse hanging on her chair, slipping away before she noticed it was missing. Mangot admitted to knowing the victim, but claimed the entire incident was spontaneous, insisting he only stole her card and had nothing to do with her disappearance. Investigators confirmed he had used the stolen card the same day, withdrawing cash from an ATM on the outskirts of town. However, he couldn't explain how he knew the PIN if Elodie hadn't told him. His story sounded shaky at best. On top of that, a background check revealed that Mangot had multiple prior convictions, including armed robbery, drug trafficking, and a 9-year prison sentence for a brutal rape. Despite his criminal history, Mangot hadn't changed his ways after being released, though he'd become more careful, trying to avoid another trip to prison. The second story. Things took a turn when police found Elodie's phone number in Mangot's phone along with their email exchanges about the photo shoot. This discovery completely contradicted his initial story, forcing him to change his account. He confessed that he had stumbled across Elodie's online modeling profile and started messaging her, pretending to be a photographer. The naive beauty was an easy target, and quickly agreed to meet without asking too many questions. Since Mangot had been using a female alias to communicate with her, he was nervous that she might become suspicious when a man showed up instead of the photographer she was expecting. But Elodie, trusting and eager, didn't find anything strange and agreed to go with him to scout for a photo shoot location late at night, even getting into his car without hesitation, something witnesses later confirmed. Once they drove to a secluded area, Guillaume veered off the main road and stopped the car. He pulled out a gun and demanded that Elodie hand over her credit card. When she refused, he grabbed her purse and found the card himself. Then he began demanding the PIN, but she still wouldn't give it to him. Furious, he slammed her head against the dashboard and started choking her until she finally relented and gave him the code. Afterward, Mengut locked Elodie in the trunk and drove to the nearest ATM to check if she had told him the truth. The pin worked, and he drained her account. But with the money in hand, he started contemplating his next move, what to do with the woman now locked in his trunk, hiding the victim and the arrest of the accomplices Guillaume Mangot. Needing time to figure out what to do, decided to hide Elodie for a while and drove to his friend Richard Lignier's house. He told Richard about the woman locked in his trunk, mentioning his plan to sell her and make a big profit, which he was willing to share. It's important to note that Richard and his wife had previously worked at the same abandoned nightclub, he as a security guard and she as a cleaner. But when the club shut down, they both lost their jobs and were barely scraping by, with Richard turning to heavy drinking. Richard agreed to help and handed Guillaume the keys to his empty garage, offering it as a place to stash the woman. He didn't want to have any direct contact with the captive himself, preferring to wait for Guillaume to figure things out and hoping to get his cut of the money soon. As later investigations revealed, Elodie was held captive for over 2 days, enduring a nightmare of torture, assault, beatings, and the agony of hunger and thirst. According to Guillaume, he and Elodie talked a lot during those 2 days, particularly about their children, who were close in age. Elodie begged him to let her go, pleading that her son needed her. Guillaume claimed that at one point he actually felt sorry for her and was considering letting her go. He even brought her a bottle of water because it was unbearably hot in the garage, and she had already been there for 2 days. However, on the evening of May 4th, things took a drastic turn when Richard, heavily drunk, decided it was time to deal with the captive. Guillaume claimed that while he was away, Richard entered the garage and strangled Elodie with a rope. Guillaume insisted he had no part in the actual crime and only helped dispose of the body. However, he refused to reveal where they had hidden her remains. The search of the Lignier residence. When police raided the Lignier house with a search warrant, the couple appeared nervous, but not particularly surprised by the events. They let the officers in without resistance and continued eating at the kitchen table, showing little interest in the ongoing search. During the investigation, police found several items belonging to Elodie in their teenage daughter's room, including her cell phone, some jewelry, a hair clip, and a wristwatch. Additionally, Elodie's purse and wallet were discovered in the possession of Richard's wife. Other belongings, as well as torn pieces of the victim's clothing, were found in the trash bin outside the house. Even more disturbing evidence surfaced during the search of Richard's garage, located near their home. Inside the empty space, investigators found brown stains that appeared to be dried blood. They also found crumpled tissues, cigarette butts, an empty plastic bottle, and a piece of laundry rope. Both Richard and his wife were taken into custody, while their 14-year-old daughter was temporarily placed with relatives. When questioned about how Elodie's belongings ended up in their home, the couple claimed that Guillaume had brought everything in exchange for letting him use their garage. They admitted to knowing he was holding a woman there but chose not to interfere, as Guillaume had promised to reward them. They also confessed to giving him a bottle of water and a piece of rope upon his request without asking why. The third story. Forensics confirmed that the brown stains on the garage floor were Elodie's blood. Even more damning, semen found on the crumpled tissues matched Guillaume's DNA, and saliva on the cigarette butts belonged to both the victim and the kidnapper. Elodie's family insisted she had never smoked in her life, as she suffered from asthma and cigarette smoke, triggered severe coughing and choking fits. The horrifying picture became clear. Guillaume had kept Elodie in the garage for 2 days, repeatedly assaulting her, likely torturing her, and forcing her to smoke as part of his abuse, changing stories and evidence. When investigators presented the forensic results to Guillaume Mangot, he once again changed his story. This time, he claimed that he and Elodie had indeed been intimate in the garage, but that it was entirely consensual. He said they had smoked together and talked a lot, and he had finally decided to let her go. However, he continued to insist that Richard Lignier had killed her while he was away, supposedly because Richard feared that Elodie might go to the police after Guillaume released her. This version of events had many inconsistencies, the biggest being that Richard had no reason to kill Elodie. First, he had never even seen the captive, and she hadn't seen him or any members of his family. Second, she had been brought to the garage in the trunk of a car, meaning she had no idea where she was and wouldn't have been able to lead the police there. Lastly, Richard was an ordinary drunk, incapable of causing physical harm to anyone. He was content with being paid in the form of Elodie's belongings and the promise of money from his friend once everything was over. The fourth story. As mentioned earlier, investigators found an empty plastic water bottle in the garage. Guillaume had claimed that he'd taken pity on Elodie and brought her some water. However, tests showed that the remaining drops of liquid in the bottle contained a high dose of powerful drugs. After consuming such a cocktail, Elodie would likely have been unconscious or barely conscious, allowing her captor to do whatever he wanted. When asked why he had drugged her, Guillaume changed his story again. Now he claimed that he had been ready to release her, and they had even agreed that she wouldn't go to the police. According to him, Elodie just wanted to go home to her family and forget about everything as if it had been a bad dream, but she allegedly tried to escape, leading to a struggle in which he hit her, explaining the bloodstains on the garage floor, then locked her inside and left. Guillaume said he had given Elodie the drugs to calm her down and prevent another escape attempt. He crushed some pills and dissolved them in water, then left the garage, returning 12 hours later. By then, Elodie was on the brink of collapse from dehydration. She quickly drank the water, not noticing the strange taste, and passed out within minutes. According to Guillaume, she died accidentally from an overdose because her weakened body couldn't handle the drugs, something he claimed he hadn't considered. Once he realized she was no longer breathing, he placed her body in the trunk of her own car, which had been left in the parking lot near the bar where they first met. A few hours later, he drove the car to Richard's property, using the keys he had taken from Elodie. Even though Guillaume still refused to say where he had taken the car with the body, there were more inconsistencies in his story. For example, the rope found in the garage had sweat and skin residue from both Elodie and Guillaume, indicating that he had likely strangled her. All the evidence pointed against the suspect, and he knew it. Hoping to reduce his sentence, Guillaume struck a deal with investigators and revealed that he had abandoned the car near the old cemetery in Aigues-Mortes. The vehicle was found on May 7th, exactly where he said it would be. It had been sitting in the scorching sun for 3 days, and the body in the trunk had already begun to decompose. The autopsy showed clear signs of torture, beatings, and strangulation. The victim had been tied up, drugged, sexually assaulted, and in the end, strangled to death with a rope. The trial and sentencing, the trial of the 3 people involved in the crime, didn't begin until February 2008. Nearly 3 years after the horrific events, Guillaume Mangot was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 22 years. As for Richard Ligné and his wife, they desperately tried to convince the jury that they hadn't known about the captive in their garage. They claimed they had simply allowed an old friend to stay with them for a few days without asking questions. But the discovery of Elodie's belongings in their home proved otherwise. The couple was charged with aiding and abetting and sentenced to 6 years in prison each. In 2010, Guillaume Mangot and his lawyer appealed the decision, trying to shift some of the responsibility for the crime onto the Ligné. This was their only hope of reducing his life sentence and lowering the minimum time he'd have to serve. On May 4th, 2010, exactly 5 years after Elodie Morel's murder, the new trial began. During the hearings, it was proven that Richard and his wife had known about Elodie's captivity and the mortal danger she was in, yet they did nothing. Not only did they keep her belongings, even giving some of them to their daughter, but they also provided Guillaume with everything he asked for: rope, water, and more, without questioning his intentions or considering the consequences. The court reduced Guillaume Mangot's life sentence to 30 years, with a requirement that he serve 2/3 of the sentence before being eligible for parole. The Ligné, for their complicity and failure to act, were each sentenced to 9 years in prison without the possibility of early release. Crimes driven by passion, jealousy, or hatred are often the most brutal, ruthless, and bloodthirsty. These include various types of violent actions, but most commonly involve cases where individuals end the life of another. Those motivated by personal reasons to deal with their victim often leave little to no chance for escape. Such offenses are committed not only by men, as one might assume. Women can sometimes match them in cruelty and inhumanity. Experienced investigators can immediately recognize the patterns and characteristic signs of crimes driven by hatred and passion, but all versions must be examined, starting with the one presented by the possible witness. In the case of the brutal attack on the mother of multiple children, Saima Khan, there were numerous questions from the very beginning. Initially, it was considered that a strong man had ended her life, so severe and extensive were the injuries inflicted upon her. Since the victim was of Pakistani descent, many suspected that what happened to her was an honor crime, committed by relatives for bringing shame upon the family. However, the truth turned out to be far more shocking and ultimately destroyed the once large and happy Khan family. Relatives were indeed involved, as were corrupt passion and a deep secret kept for many years. The happy Khan family. The Khan couple, originally from Pakistan, emigrated to the UK in the early 1980s in search of a better life. They settled in Luton, located in the southern part of the ceremonial county of Bedfordshire, about 50 miles from London. In 1982, the couple's first child, a daughter named Saima, was born. 7 years later, in 1989, the family welcomed their second daughter, Saba, followed by 2 long-awaited sons. From a young age, Saima became a true support and help for her parents. While they worked tirelessly to provide their children with everything necessary and ensure them a decent life, the eldest daughter practically became a nanny for her younger siblings. She kept the house in order, cooked meals, and still managed to excel in school, becoming one of the top students in her class. The parents had a small business, which allowed the family to settle in a prestigious area in a spacious townhouse. As raising children is a priority in a Muslim family, the couple raised their heirs, following Islamic traditions, while also striving to give them a good education. The daughters and sons took pride in their culture, honored their customs, but were open to learning new things and free to choose their professions. Saima and Sabah had been inseparable since childhood. They shared their deepest secrets, felt mutual support, and always knew they could rely on each other in everything. The sisters were fluent in both English and Dutch, as the family had lived in Amsterdam for several years. All the children excelled in school and were a great source of pride for their parents. Arranged marriage. Saima was always a kind, compassionate, and very caring young woman. She sought to help others, which led her to enroll in a medical college after finishing high school. She successfully graduated in 2003 and worked as a nurse in one of the local hospitals for a while. Soon after, she decided to slightly change her career path and began working as a caregiver. This allowed Saima to set her own schedule and work hours, which was very convenient since she continued to look after her younger siblings. Saba admired her older sister and tried to follow her example in everything. Even as they grew older, the sisters remained inseparable and very close. It seemed that this would always be the case, as who could be closer than one's own sister? When Saima turned 22, her parents began to consider marrying off their eldest daughter. They reached out to relatives living in Pakistan to find a suitable husband for her. Although Saima was born and raised in Europe, where people held more liberal views, she respected her culture's traditions and did not resist, agreeing to tie her fate to a man she had never even met. It's worth noting that arranged marriages are still a common practice in Pakistan. Moreover, marriage to a citizen of a European country is sometimes the only reliable and quick way to obtain citizenship, leave, and dramatically change one's life. For this reason, marriages are often arranged between relatives or people with a significant age difference. The process of finding a groom took some time, but since Saima wasn't in a hurry to marry, she didn't push the matter. Eventually, the relatives chose a man named Hafiz Rehman for Saima, who was only 3 years older than her. He had no bad habits, and all the relatives described him as a calm, balanced, and sensible person. Hafiz had lived his entire life in Pakistan and had never left the country. His parents wanted a better life for their son and believed that somewhere in Europe, greater opportunities awaited him. Thus, they were very pleased when they were offered a bride from the UK and immediately gave their consent. Once the relatives settled all the details, preparations for the wedding began. The families organized a lavish celebration for their heirs, attended by over 200 guests. The marriage was formalized in Pakistan, following all religious and civil norms, and afterward, the young bride flew back to Luton to begin the process of securing a marriage visa for her husband so he could join her. The paperwork took some time, so Hafiz and Saima didn't actually start living together until 2008. By then, Saima was 26 years old and her husband was 29. The couple moved into a spacious multi-level apartment owned by the Khan family, where the younger siblings also lived. There was enough room for everyone, and all the family members got along well. Hafiz obtained a driver's license and started working for the city's taxi service. Initially, he wanted his wife not to work, as is customary in Muslim countries, but to focus on household chores and raising children. However, Saima, who was used to earning her own money and being independent, flatly refused, as she greatly enjoyed her work. Her husband didn't insist and accepted her position. However, as their children were born, Saima had to significantly adjust her work schedule. In 2009, Saima gave birth to their first daughter. 3 years later, she had a son, followed by a second son 2 years later, and in 2015, their youngest daughter was born. Saima managed to brilliantly balance work and motherhood, though her younger sister Saba always helped her with the children, watching over them while everyone else was at work. Corrupt passion. Meanwhile, in what appeared to be the happy and prosperous Khan family, events were unfolding that no one suspected. The younger daughter had fallen in love with her older sister's husband as soon as he moved into their home. At the time, Sabah was only 18 years old, and Hafiz seemed to her the perfect man. He didn't exert any moral pressure on his wife, allowed her to work and make her own choices, was kind to all the household members, and never even raised his voice. At first, Sabah showed him only subtle signs of attention, longing glances, sighs, awkward touches, and shy smiles. The experienced man immediately recognized Sabah's hints, but at first, he didn't show it, merely observing her. He was flattered by the fact that this young woman, 10.5 years his junior, had tender feelings for him. This continued for about 2 years, but after the birth of their first child, when Saima was fully absorbed in caring for their daughter, Hafiz took advantage of Saba's naivety and innocence, seducing her. From that point on, their secret affair began, developing right under the noses of the entire family, though no one noticed it. Or perhaps no one wanted to notice. Hafiz believed he loved both women equally, and at one point, he even considered formally taking a second wife. However, he soon learned that he couldn't marry the sisters, as this contradicted not only Islamic traditions, but also all norms of morality and ethics. Nevertheless, his relationship with Sabah did not end. The relationship between the married man and his wife's younger sister was corrupt, and thus, it couldn't be allowed to become known. The lovers tried to minimize their interactions in front of other family members, but they constantly exchanged messages in which they confessed their feelings and arranged times and places for their meetings. They typically arranged their intimate encounters in the back seat of the car Hafiz used for his taxi job, or they indulged in pleasures in the marital bedroom when no one was home. Hafiz would adjust his schedule to have time with his young lover while the rest of the family was at work, ensuring they wouldn't be caught. Unplanned pregnancy. As time passed, Sabah became more insistent, demanding more attention and growing increasingly jealous of her lover's relationship with her sister. At 23, when her parents decided it was time to find a husband for their younger daughter, she reacted very differently from Saima. Sabah rejected the idea outright, pleading with them to wait, explaining that she also wanted to pursue an education like her sister and asking them to delay the marriage for at least a couple of years. Though perplexed, her parents eventually gave in and postponed the search for a groom. In the fall of 2014, while Saima and Hafiz were expecting their fourth child, Sabah suddenly realized she was pregnant as well. She confided in her lover, but the man was overcome with terror and panicked. He knew that if the truth came out, it would end his marriage, bring disgrace to the entire family, and make his own life unbearable. The only solution was to terminate the unwanted pregnancy before anyone found out. Sabah understood this was the only viable option, but she was also aware of how dangerous and risky this step could be for her. She suggested they flee to another country where no one could find them, but the man refused outright, as he loved his wife and children and could never abandon them. Therefore, the young lover was forced to end her unborn child's life, which was a tremendous shock for her and likely took a serious toll on her mental health. Previously, Sabah hadn't considered the consequences of her affair with her sister's husband. She simply lived in her fantasies where she and Hafiz were happy together, with no Saima or her children in the picture. But after her parents started talking about marriage, she became scared. She realized that she had given her innocence to another man, which was already a disgrace for her and the entire family, even if no one knew who her lover was. Now, after the termination of the pregnancy, she was uncertain about how the procedure might affect her health in the future and whether she would be able to have children at all. These thoughts tormented and consumed Sabah from within, robbing her of peace and sleep, making her irritable and bitter. To make matters worse, Hafiz distanced himself from her after the termination. He feared that the situation could repeat itself, so he became very cautious and seemed to have decided to break off the relationship with his lover. By that time, he and Saima had welcomed their fourth child, and he spent all his time with his wife and children, as if trying to atone for his guilt. A mad plan. Sabah found herself almost unable to interact with her lover face to face, as he was either at work or with his family. However, she sent Hafiz hundreds of messages daily, sometimes swearing her love, other times threatening to do something to herself if he didn't be with her as before, and at times even threatening to reveal their affair to their parents. She was driving the man to madness, and he didn't know what to do or how to handle the situation. Since both Hafiz and Saima were working while still living in the family home, they had managed to save a substantial amount of money over the years, enough to buy their own place. At the beginning of 2016, during a family meeting, Hafiz brought up the topic, noting that Sabah would soon be married off, and the younger brothers were also starting to look for brides. Once everyone had their own families, the house would become very crowded. Hafiz pointed out that it was time for him, his wife, and their growing 4 children to get their own home, while Saima's younger siblings could continue living with their parents for a while longer. The Khan spouses agreed with their son-in-law's opinion and supported him. However, when Sabah heard that her lover was planning to move out, she literally lost her mind. She felt like her world was falling apart, that her sister was stealing the man she loved, and something needed to be done immediately. Overcome with jealousy and rage, she envied her sister and believed that Saima didn't deserve such happiness. At some point, Sabah decided that the only solution was the death of her own sister, as that would be the only way for her and her husband to be together. She reasoned that if Saima were gone, the main problem would disappear with her, as Hafiz would never consider divorce. But as a widower, he could marry again, even his late wife's sister. Searching for a solution. Over the next few months, Sabah scoured the internet daily, searching for ways to discreetly end someone's life, making it appear as an accident without arousing suspicion. However, her sister had no health issues, wasn't allergic to anything, and wasn't taking any medication. She looked into ads for selling poisonous snakes and spiders, but was deterred by the thought that other family members might be harmed. Additionally, Sabah herself was terribly afraid of insects and reptiles, so she couldn't bring anything like that into the house and release it. She dismissed the idea of using poisons, fearing that experts would detect traces of toxic substances and trace them back to her. One day, she stumbled upon a website offering various magical services. A certain sorcerer claimed he could enchant anyone, create protective charms, attract wealth, heal, and even cast deadly curses. The last option intrigued Sabah, and she decided this might be the perfect solution to her problem. In early April 2016, the plotter contacted the sorcerer and asked him to eliminate Saima using black magic as quickly as possible. She sent him photos and a few personal items of her sister, which he said were necessary to conduct the death ritual, and she also transferred a payment of $7,000 to the account he provided, money she had saved over several years. As expected, the ritual didn't work. Saima felt great. She and her husband had already found a suitable house and were actively preparing to move. Saba fell into despair. She tried to reach the sorcerer again, but after receiving the money, he simply stopped responding. Meanwhile, the Khan couple was already busy searching for a groom for their younger daughter, so time was running out, and the problem needed to be solved urgently. The girl even considered finding a hitman, but firstly, she had given all her savings to the sorcerer, so she had no way to pay a hired criminal, and secondly, she was held back by the fear of being caught. Feeling her plans falling apart, Saba decided to take matters into her own hands and personally eliminate her sister. Online, she found information on how to convincingly stage a robbery and decided to make it look like a burglar had broken into the house, and Saima became his unfortunate victim. However, the main problem was that the Khan family consisted of 11 people, all living under one roof, and someone was always home. The right moment. As Saba desperately pondered how to execute her sinister and ruthless plan, tragic news suddenly arrived about the death of a Khan family relative living in another city. Her parents, brothers, and brother-in-law immediately began preparing for the trip to attend the funeral and pay their last respects. At home, only Saima, who couldn't go due to her work, her younger sister who was watching the children, and the children themselves, aged 7, 4, 2, and 1, remained. Sabah quickly realized that this was her only chance to carry out her plan, and there would be no better opportunity. So, as soon as she heard about the relative's death and the upcoming trip to the funeral, she went to the nearest supermarket that same day, bought a large kitchen knife, and hid it in her room. On the morning of May 23, 2016, Hafiz drove his mother-in-law, father-in-law, and 2 brothers-in-law to another city for the funeral, planning to return late in the evening. After lunch, Saima went to work and was also expected back no earlier than midnight. Sabah stayed home with the 4 children. She had time to think everything through once more and prepare for the terrible crime. Brutal attack on a mother of many. Sabah put the children to bed early, then went downstairs and called her sister, saying that her youngest daughter was fussy and seemed to have a fever. The news of her child feeling unwell prompted Saima to finish work early and leave around 10 o'clock in the evening. By 10:30, she arrived home, but it was dark and quiet. The outdoor surveillance camera recorded her entering the house and turning on the light, but less than a minute later, it went out. As soon as Saima crossed the threshold and closed the door behind her, Sabah attacked her from behind, delivering several strong blows to her neck. It's likely that the victim didn't even see who assaulted her, and the initial wounds were fatal, causing her to bleed out within minutes. However, the frenzied sister continued to stab the unfortunate woman even after she stopped showing signs of life. The neighbors heard a few loud screams, but everything quickly quieted down, and no one called the police, thinking it was something insignificant. The noise and commotion woke Saima's eldest daughter, who came out of her room. The girl approached the stairs but didn't descend into the dark, only asking what was happening. Her aunt shouted for her to go back to bed immediately, and the child obeyed. After the gruesome attack, Sabah removed her blood-soaked clothes and wrapped them in a plastic bag along with the weapon. She also added some hastily gathered jewelry and valuables from the house. She planned to dispose of the bundle later but hadn't figured out how yet, so she hid it behind a wardrobe in her room, believing no one would think to search there for evidence. The criminal took a shower and only then noticed several cuts on her hands sustained during the attack on her sister. She then broke a window by the back door to make it look like a burglar had entered the house, and upon encountering the unexpectedly returned homeowner, decided to eliminate the witness. Only after this did Saba call the police to report her sister's death. A very strange crime. The emergency responders who arrived at the scene could do nothing for the victim and only confirmed her death. The crime scene stunned even seasoned officers, resembling a bloodbath, but the sheer brutality of the act suggested a personal motive behind the attack on the young woman. According to the only witness, Saba, she had put the children to bed and dozed off with them in the room, but not before calling her sister and asking her to come home early because the youngest daughter was fussy. Saba claimed that she didn't hear an intruder enter the house and only woke up when she heard screams. Concerned for the children, she cautiously left the room only a few minutes later. By that time, the house was already quiet. Descending the stairs, she stumbled upon her sister's mutilated body and immediately called her relatives and emergency services. The police noticed several deep cuts on Saba's hands and asked how she got them. The girl hesitated a bit, but then said she must have cut herself on the broken glass from the window that the intruder shattered. The returning members of the Khan family were devastated by grief and couldn't immediately say if anything was missing from their home, but later noted the disappearance of some jewelry and valuables. Everything pointed to a burglar entering the house and taking Saima's life when she unexpectedly returned. However, the nature of the crime and its ferocity suggested otherwise. The medical examiners counted 68 stab wounds on the victim's body, most of which were concentrated on her neck, face, and chest. The young woman's throat was slashed so deeply that her head was nearly severed, and her right arm was hanging by a mere flap of skin. This led the forensic experts to speculate that the criminal was a strong man, but no leads had been found yet. When asked if the murdered woman had any enemies or ill-wishers, her relatives unanimously dismissed the idea, noting that Saima was kind, honest, and respectable, and everyone around her loved her. However, during questioning, the younger sister unexpectedly claimed that the deceased allegedly had an affair she kept secret from everyone, and a jealous lover might have been the one to deal with her. Saba's words and behavior aroused serious suspicion. From the beginning, she appeared calm and seemed not to mourn the loss. Her testimony during the interrogations sounded rehearsed, and now it seemed she was deliberately trying to tarnish her sister's honor, who could no longer defend herself. Irrefutable evidence. In their search for any leads, the detectives decided to seize the Khan family's home computer and examine the contents of the mobile phones of all family members. This led to a major breakthrough in the case, as they discovered not only irrefutable evidence, but also uncovered the motive behind such a brutal crime. The investigators were able to recover deleted messages from Saba's and Hafiz's phones, revealing their long-term, intimate relationship. Saba repeatedly professed her love for her sister's husband, saying she couldn't live without him and arranging meetings, to which he responded in kind. However, in the past few months, the tone of their communication had changed drastically. Hafiz asked her to leave him alone, stating that everything was over. The messages also revealed that Saba had been pregnant with Saima's husband's child, but terminated the pregnancy at his request. The restored search history on the home computer eliminated any remaining doubt about Saba's guilt. It turned out that over the past 6 months, she had desperately been searching for ways to get rid of her sister and even tried to place a deadly curse on her before deciding to personally deal with the relative she saw as a rival. Thanks to surveillance footage from a supermarket, it was established that the suspect had bought a knife there the day before the tragedy, likely the weapon used in the crime. A thorough search of the house followed, and in a hidden spot in Saba's room, investigators found a bundle containing her blood-stained clothes, the knife, and the missing jewelry. Trial and sentence. Saba Khan was arrested on May 31st, 2016, 8 days after she committed the crime. The entire family was in shock and couldn't believe that such intense emotions had been brewing right under their noses for years, with their son-in-law essentially living with both sisters for 4 years. The parents couldn't comprehend how their younger daughter could decide to end her sister's life and how they would now live with this reality. The trial of the criminal began in October 2017. Saba claimed that Hafiz had taken advantage of her innocence and seduced her. Afterward, he allegedly manipulated her feelings for years to satisfy his needs and ultimately drove her to take such a desperate step. Naturally, Hafiz denied all responsibility, shifting the blame entirely onto Sabah, claiming that she had been the one pursuing him. The defendant admitted to the premeditated brutal attack on her sister, but she never expressed remorse for her actions, behaving calmly, even detachedly, during the court proceedings. She was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after no less than 25 years. She is currently serving her sentence in one of Bedfordshire's correctional facilities. Have you ever wondered how many people go missing around the world in a single day? How about in a whole year? We dug up these chilling statistics and just imagine, every day, 607 people vanish without a trace. In 1 year, that adds up to 221,644 missing individuals. Over the past 20 years, the number reaches a staggering 4,432,880 people. That's more than the entire population of New Zealand, or nearly the entire population of Ireland. Think about that for a moment. Almost 4.5 million people from each generation simply disappear. But how is it that, in this age of digital information, people can still vanish? Here's the answer. Some deliberately choose not to be found, while others are kidnapped to fuel the black market for organ trafficking, sex slavery, or for illegal medical experiments. And then there are those twisted individuals who take people simply to fulfill their own vile goals. But sometimes the missing are found, and they become another tragic headline. On October 24, 2019, 19-year-old Anaya Blanchard was reported missing by the Auburn, Alabama Police Department. Her parents and relatives launched a massive search campaign, and within days, local authorities joined the effort. Could it be that this young college student's disappearance was just a dramatic teenage stunt? That maybe she'd simply partied too hard or gotten upset with her parents like so many teens do? That kind of behavior might be possible for any other teenager, but not for Anaya Blanchard. Anaya Haley Blanchard was born on June 22, 2000, to Elijah Blanchard and Angela Haley Harris. The family lived in Homewood, Alabama. Her father was a businessman, and her mother was a registered nurse. When Anaya was about 3 years old, her parents split up but maintained a friendly relationship. In 2003, her mother, Angela, met heavyweight MMA fighter Walt Harris, and soon, the two got married. Despite her parents' divorce when she was still a little girl, Anaya had a great relationship with both of them. Over the years, she became a part of 2 different families, finding love and support from her stepmother, Yashiba Blanchard, and her stepdad, UFC fighter Walt Harris. These 2 couples and her older brother, Elijah Blanchard Jr., who was just 17 months her senior, meant the world to her. From a young age, Anaya had a strong maternal instinct, something she picked up from watching her mother work. Anaya's kindness made those around her feel loved and at peace, and she was always ready to listen and lend a helping hand when someone was in need. At 19, Anaya Haley Blanchard was the glue that held her family together, bringing them happiness and strength. Anaya graduated from Homewood High School, where she had a real passion for playing softball. In 2019, she enrolled at Southern Union State Community College, SUSCC, to study early childhood education. Her dream was to eventually transfer to Auburn University and become an elementary school teacher. On October 23, 2019, Anaya and her brother went to visit their mom and stepdad. After dinner, they said their goodbyes and headed back toward the college dorms. Around 11 p.m., Anaya dropped her brother off at his place and continued on her way alone. They lived just 10 minutes apart. She let him know that her phone battery was running low, but assured him there was no need to worry since she didn't have far to drive. Later that night, around midnight, Anaya called a friend. But after that, Anaya never made it back to her dorm. The next day, her family reported 19-year-old Anaya Blanchard as missing to the police. One of the biggest red flags that something was seriously wrong was that Anaya had left her dog Blue alone overnight. Her mom knew Anaya would never do that. That dog was like a child to her. Anaya's phone activity ended at 11:47 p.m., suggesting that her phone either died or was turned off around that time. It last pinged near the Clarion Inn area on South College Street. A massive search effort began. Her parents appeared on TV shows, volunteers posted missing person flyers, and search groups combed the areas around where she was last seen. And all that effort paid off. On October 25th, about 50 miles from where Anaya disappeared, her 2017 Honda CR-V was found in a Montgomery apartment complex. When police inspected the car, they discovered that the interior was covered in blood, and there were serious dents and damages to the exterior, consistent with a collision. According to law enforcement, the damage occurred sometime between Wednesday and Friday night. Days went by, but there was still no sign of Anaya. Her parents were devastated. They continued making appearances on television, desperately trying to keep Anaya's story in the public eye, hoping it would lead to more clues about her whereabouts. A week after she was reported missing, 19-year-old Anaya Blanchard was still officially classified as a missing person. She was last seen wearing a black dress and brown boots while driving her black Honda CR-V. In an effort to get more people involved and help bring Anaya home, a $105,000 reward was offered for any information leading to her whereabouts. But despite the reward, the search for Anaya didn't pick up speed. There were almost no solid leads, or if there were, they weren't being followed up on properly. Let's try to piece together the sequence of events and pay attention to any details that law enforcement might have missed. On Wednesday, October 23rd, just before midnight, Anaya Blanchard was on the phone with a friend. This was the last time anyone who knew her heard her voice. By Thursday, October 24th, a missing person report had been filed with the Auburn Police Department. "We need as many people as possible searching for Anaya right now. This is not like her. She would have come home," said Angela Haley Harris, Anaya's mother. Late Thursday night, her stepfather, UFC heavyweight fighter Walt Harris, posted a video on social media pleading with the public to help find his stepdaughter. But as the days went by, hope began to fade, and her family and friends were left clinging to the hope that she would return. On October 25th, after Anaya's car was found with blood inside, her parents were overcome with despair. On Sunday, October 27th, a vigil was held for the missing teenager who, according to her mother, had been with a man on the night she disappeared. The young man she had just met, that's all. She didn't say where she met him, how she met him, or where they went. She just said she was with this guy she'd just met, but my daughter wouldn't just go off with a complete stranger, Haley Harris explained. On Monday, October 28th, the police released surveillance footage showing Anaya entering a convenience store around 11:21 p.m. to buy some potato chips. By October 30th, a task force had been assembled, made up of more than 60 agencies, including the FB1, the Department of Homeland Security, and the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences. The disappearance of Anaya Blanchard triggered a massive search operation. The multi-agency task force, which included the FB1, the Department of Homeland Security, and the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences, was actively involved in the search. The case quickly gained national media attention. The only real lead the police had was Anaya's damaged car, which was abandoned near an apartment complex in Montgomery. The car showed signs of a collision, and blood was found on the front passenger seat. The Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences confirmed that the blood belonged to Anaya Blanchard, indicating she might have suffered a life-threatening injury. Investigators also discovered a bullet hole in the passenger door and shell casings in the left cup holder. Police noted a strong smell of cleaning solution in the car. Despite this, there were still no suspects or solid leads pointing investigators in the right direction. As time passed, detectives had no choice but to dig deeper into the existing evidence. When detectives took a closer look at the surveillance footage from the convenience store where Anaya was last seen, they noticed a black man lingering near her. On November 6th, the Auburn Police Department released an image from surveillance footage showing a man who could be of interest in the investigation. Detectives identified the man and were waiting to speak with him. The individual was described as a black man between 20 and 30 years old, weighing around 200 pounds and standing between 5 feet 8 inches and 5 feet 10 inches. He was last seen wearing dark pants, dark shoes, and a camo hoodie with the word Vans printed in white on the back. Police reported that the suspect left the area in a silver or gray Lincoln Town car from the early 2000s. The next day, the man was identified as 29-year-old Ibrahim Yazid from Montgomery. Surveillance footage confirmed that he had been in the store at the same time as Anaya. The video shows him buying alcohol while persistently looking over at Anaya. He was later caught on camera exiting Anaya Blanchard's car from the passenger side. Footage from another gas station showed him getting back into her car on the passenger side again. Afterward, Anaya and Ibrahim drove away together. But if the bullet hole was in the passenger seat, why was the blood Anaya's? Eyewitness accounts confirmed that on that night, Anaya Blanchard and Ibrahim Yazid were seen talking near her car by the store. One witness claimed she saw Ibrahim force Anaya into the car before driving off in her vehicle. According to detectives, this witness shared what she saw with a friend, but neither of them intervened to help the stranger. By all accounts, Ibrahim forcibly put Anaya in the passenger seat. At the time of Anaya Blanchard's disappearance, Ibrahim Yazid already had a long criminal record and was out on a $295,000 bond, facing charges of marijuana possession, robbery, and attempted murder. By age 30, Ibrahim had accumulated almost every crime in the book, including violent offenses, except for an actual homicide. The suspect was also accused of attempting to kill 2 police officers in 2012 when he rammed into their car and was arrested in 2017 for aggravated assault on a police officer. He had a history of assaulting officers with weapons, dealing synthetic drugs, and participating in robberies. In one escape attempt, he even crashed into a police car. Yet, shockingly, the court kept releasing this repeat offender on bail, or giving him minimal punishment. In June 2020, Ibrahim Yazid was charged with the 2018 murder of Stephen Hamby. He was also charged with the attempted murder of a woman who was shot in the face during the same incident that killed Stephen Hamby. Somehow, despite all of this, he was still walking free. Auburn Police Chief Paul Register stated, "Further investigation and analysis of the evidence determined that Yazid was at the same location where Anaya Blanchard was last seen, and he was involved in abducting Anaya against her will. There's no reason to believe that Ibrahim knew Anaya. She may have just been a random target of a carjacking." Officials didn't rule out more arrests and continued searching for any accomplices of the suspect. An arrest warrant was issued for 30-year-old Ibrahim Yazid, who was wanted on first-degree kidnapping charges and had a history of arrests for violent crimes. Authorities actively searching for Yazid warned that the man from Montgomery might be armed and dangerous. On November 7th, police issued an arrest warrant for Ibrahim Yazid on first-degree kidnapping charges. After the warrant was issued, authorities spent about 12 hours looking for him. This happened 2 days after the surveillance footage of the man believed to be Yazid was released. A tip led police to Pensacola, where the Florida Regional Fugitive Task Force tracked him down near an interstate exit. At around 2:30 a.m., Yazid was taken into custody at the Escambia County Jail in Florida on kidnapping charges and later agreed to be extradited back to Alabama. He was denied bail since he was considered a fugitive wanted in another state. Anaya Blanchard's family feared that her warm, bubbly nature might have put her in a dangerous situation, and her willingness to help others led her right into the hands of criminals. She's just someone who lifts everyone's spirits and brings happiness. She's so full of life. It pains me to say this, but maybe that's what got her into this situation. She was so trusting, and I think someone might have taken advantage of that, her mother said in yet another interview. The family also dismissed rumors that Anaya had plans to meet up with some guy the night she disappeared, stating they went through her social media accounts and confirmed that Anaya hadn't been talking to anyone other than her family and her roommate. One of the last messages Anaya sent was a Snapchat to her roommate saying she was with a guy she had just met. But Haley Harris didn't believe Anaya wrote that message because the wording and style didn't sound like her daughter at all. She chose not to share further details about that message. As investigators suspected, Ibrahim had accomplices who helped cover up the carjacking and were with him the night Anaya went missing. The investigation hit another dead end until police arrested a second suspect, Antoine Squirmy Fisher, on November 22nd. Later, a prosecutor revealed that Fisher had helped Yazid switch to another car and provided him with money when he fled to Florida. Before detectives could fully question Fisher, the kidnapping case had turned into a crime. On November 23rd, police arrested a third suspect, David Johnson Jr., and charged him with hindering prosecution. Charges against Fisher and Johnson were eventually dropped. Lee County District Attorney Brandon Hughes declined to say how Johnson was obstructing the prosecution. A gag order on the case prevents attorneys, prosecutors, and witnesses from talking to the media about the details. According to Fisher, Ibrahim Yazid arrived at David Johnson Sr.'s house on October 24, 2019, sometime between 5 and 6 a.m. Fisher claimed he saw Anaya Blanchard's car parked near some bushes at that time. Yazid allegedly told Fisher he needed more gas for the stolen vehicle. Fisher drove Yazid to a gas station where they filled up a can with gasoline before returning to Johnson's house. Yazid reportedly told Fisher he needed to grab something, so Fisher drove him north on Interstate 85 towards Shorter. Fisher said they stopped in Montgomery, where Yazid picked up what he needed, an assault rifle. Afterward, they drove to a cemetery off I-85. There, Fisher claimed he saw Yazid dragging something that looked like two legs wrapped in a blanket. Yazid supposedly spent some time in the woods before coming back to the car. By the end of November, hope of finding Anaya alive had all but disappeared. On November 25th, police came across discarded human remains. They were discovered in Macon County, in a wooded area off County Road. Investigators found a skull with what appeared to be a bullet hole in the top. Alongside the remains, they found clothing that matched what Anaya Blanchard was last seen wearing, as well as a lead projectile. On November 27th, the remains were officially identified as those of Anaya Blanchard. An autopsy revealed that she had been killed by a gunshot wound to the head. As a result, the charges against Yazid were upgraded from first-degree kidnapping to capital murder. He was charged with 2 counts of capital murder, one for committing the crime inside a vehicle with a deadly weapon while the victim was in the vehicle, and another for committing murder during a first-degree kidnapping. The preliminary hearing was delayed multiple times due to the COVID-19 outbreak, but the public and Anaya's family patiently awaited the harshest penalty for the man who took their beloved daughter from them. Yazid, accused of kidnapping 19-year-old Anaya Blanchard, appeared in court for a preliminary hearing on November 20th. Yazid's attorney, Elijah Beaver, filed a motion requesting a hearing, simply stating that his client was entitled to a preliminary hearing on the kidnapping charges since, according to him, Yazid didn't kill her, but only resisted when Anaya pulled out a weapon. The next hearing took place in June, where Auburn Police Detective Josh Mixon testified about the case. Defense attorneys challenged the prosecution's claim that the crime was committed in Lee County. After reviewing the evidence, Judge Russell Bush found probable cause to present the case to the Lee County grand jury. According to court records, Anaya Blanchard fought back against the criminals who tried to steal her car. She knew how to handle a firearm and could defend herself, but the experienced criminal was quicker than the young woman. It's worth noting that on March 6, 2023, Ibrahim Yazid still hadn't entered a guilty plea to any of the charges against him, so he remains in custody without bail as he awaits trial, which has been postponed multiple times due to the COVID-19 pandemic and other legal reasons. However, without bail or a direct dismissal of the case, 34-year-old Ibrahim Yazid will stay in the Lee County Sheriff's Office jail until his final conviction or acquittal. Anaya Blanchard's disappearance and death drew nationwide attention and media coverage. Her death led to the creation of Anaya's Law, which reformed Alabama's bail laws as her accused killer, Ibrahim Yazid, was out on bail when Anaya was killed. The Alabama state constitution guarantees the right to bail for all defendants, except those charged with capital offenses. Yazid had been released on bail after being charged with kidnapping and attempted murder, which are not capital offenses. Anaya's Law expands the exceptions to include other serious crimes like arson, burglary, domestic violence, aggravated child abuse, assault, robbery, kidnapping, human trafficking, rape, sexual torture, terrorism, and homicide. Prosecutors will be allowed to request a bail hearing, which the judge can either grant or deny. If the hearing is held, the defendant will be allowed to testify, present witnesses, and cross-examine witnesses. Prosecutors will need to demonstrate that the defendant is a flight risk or a danger to public safety. The judge can then either approve or deny bail. As of November 8, 2022, Anaya's Law, House Bill 81, was passed by Alabama voters. A scholarship in memory of Anaya Blanchard was established by the Homewood City Schools. In June 2020, a bench in Patriot Park in Homewood was dedicated to her. Have you ever wondered how many beautiful and successful girls are killed by scoundrels just to satisfy their lust? A whole life, dreams, opportunities destroyed in an instant. And the worst part is that the criminals have been living among us for years. Today, we will visit the southern U.S. state of Arkansas and look at a case that has officially remained unsolved to this day. Our story begins at the University of Louisiana, where a young music student, Carol Yvette Larpenter, fell in love with her professor, Paul Dirksmeyer. Let's imagine that they were very happily married together, as their union lasted for years and gave the world a beautiful baby girl, Nona. December 26, 1985, in the small town of Zachary in the state of Louisiana, was born Nona Carol Dirksmeyer. After the birth of her daughter, the family moved to the town of Dover, where the childhood and adolescence of the girl passed. Nona grew up a timid and insecure child. She liked to be alone and was reluctant to make friends with peers. At a young age, her birth father mistreated her, which affected the girl's emotional state. It is not known exactly how long this went on, but Nona never told anyone about it until her father's death in 1996. After his death, Nona grew stronger morally and tried to trust the people around her again. In middle school, Nona became friends with her classmate Kevin Jones. Teenagers trusted each other's secrets and helped each other in their studies. Gradually, friendship turned into something more, and young people began to meet. In 2004, after graduating from Dover High School, Nona entered Arkansas Tech University, where she majored in music education, so she and her mother had to move from their hometown to a larger city, Russellville. Nona grew up to become a radiant beauty, who charmed others not only with her beauty and enchanting voice, but also with a huge kind heart. But it was difficult for her to be happy. Nona did not consider herself a beauty, because she did not see what her friends saw in her when they offered her to participate in beauty contests. But one day she agreed to the entreaties and entered the Miss Arkansas pageant. But she didn't really care about the prestige of the Miss Arkansas title or other honors. She just wanted to find a way to educate others about what happens to children who are abused by their parents, because the trauma she had previously suffered was forever etched in her soul. Nona was the perfect person to volunteer with, as she always wanted other children to be able to enjoy their childhood and have someone they could talk to if they needed to, rather than being silent for years because of fear. She was the reigning Miss Petit Jean Valley and entered beauty pageants to raise awareness about abuse. Kevin was always there to help Nona through some of the difficult times she was living through. People around them thought they were a perfect couple, and they were just very happy together. Their mutual feeling with Kevin grew stronger. They dated for several years and made plans for the future. Kevin was a popular athlete at Arkansas Tech University. Besides, their families liked each other. Life flowed on its own. Nona's mom, Carol, remarried a while later to Dwayne Dipert, who was in no hurry to show paternal feelings for Nona, and that suited her just fine. When Dwayne came into her mother's life, Nona moved out and got her own separate apartment. On Christmas Eve 2005, Kevin, after coming home from college, went to Nona's apartment where they spent a wonderful romantic evening. After midnight, he drove home from Russellville to Dover. He called Nona when he got home to tell her he had made it home safe and sound. He overslept the next morning, and when he woke up and turned on his phone, he saw a text message from Nona. "Good morning, Kendall Muffin. I love you and hope you have a great day." Kevin knew that Nona had plans for December 15th, so he didn't bother her with a return message. Nona was working at a volunteer organization that day, and Kevin had invited his mother Janice to a Christmas party for teachers. But on the way to the party, Kevin told his mom that he was a little worried about Nona since she hadn't returned any of his calls during the day. He thought it was very strange that Nona hadn't returned his calls, because in 4.5 years, we had developed a certain stereotype, and they were sure to return each other's calls. He sent her a text message. "Are you alive?" But there was no response. But where was she and why wasn't she answering? In his haste to leave the party, Kevin called his friend Ryan, who worked as a pizza delivery guy. He asked him to stop by Nona's house and check on her since his delivery area was near her house. Standing outside Nona's house, Ryan informed Kevin that the light was on in her apartment, but no one opened the door. Overcoming the rising tide of panic, Kevin and his mother hurried to Nona's apartment. On the spot, he realized he didn't have the keys to the apartment with him, so he and Ryan started knocking and ringing the doorbell, but no one opened. Panic was building, and Kevin felt like he was going crazy with worry. He knew the apartment had another sliding glass door in the back, and they ran to it. Kevin didn't think he could get in through that door because he knew Nona always kept a stick in the handle to keep that entrance securely closed. But the stick wasn't there. As he reached the door and grasped the handle, Ryan touched it and shrieked, "There she is, can't you see her?" Inside, there was Nona lying on the floor, naked and motionless. Kevin ran into the apartment, flipped Nona over and hugged her. He yelled that she needed to be taken to the hospital right away. He wiped the blood from her face and tried CPR, but her eyes were closed and blood was flowing from the head wound. Kevin's mom, who went up to the apartment after the boys called emergency services. She said, "My son's friend. I think she's dead. There's been a terrible accident." While waiting for help, Kevin picked Nona up in his arms and cradled her as if to keep her warm. His hands were covered in her blood. He was crying hard, but he couldn't wipe away the tears. A few minutes later, paramedics and police arrived. Nona was stripped naked, an empty condom wrapper lying on a table a few feet away. But there was no physical evidence that she had been raped. Her head had been crushed, probably by the heavy base of the lamp lying next to her, and whoever had delivered the fatal blow had first struck her in the face with a fist and then stabbed her several times with a knife with shallow cuts on her neck and shoulders. Before swinging the lampstand, the perpetrator strangled her with such force that he broke the hyoid bone in her neck. It became obvious that this was indeed a murder. Kevin was taken to the station to ask only a few questions about Nona. As a result, for more than 3 hours at the station, Kevin was interrogated about his relationship with Nona, how it happened that he was the one who found her body, and where he spent the whole day. According to Kevin, it was not an interrogation, but a conviction on the part of the police officers that he was involved, accompanied by shouting and saying that they knew he did it. So from being Nona's boyfriend, Kevin Jones turned into a suspect in her murder. Kevin denied his involvement, and when he was asked to take a polygraph test, he agreed. During the lie detector, he was worried, sometimes hesitated over the answers. In the end, he was informed that he failed the test, which meant that it was Kevin who killed Nona. But the guy continued to deny his involvement in the tragedy. Nona and Kevin were high school sweethearts who had been dating for 5 years. There was never anything in their relationship that could hint that Kevin had a temper or was crazy, but immediately all suspicions fell on him. But why didn't the police look more closely at other possible suspects? The police said they checked the alibis of all the potential suspects, thus settling on Kevin. On December 22, 2005, the state medical examiner's office determined that 19-year-old Nona Dirksmeyer died from multiple blunt and acute injuries that included stab wounds on the back right side of her neck and superficial cuts on the front and right side of her neck, shoulder, and ear. You won't believe how unfortunate the crime scene was, and you'll be shocked when you hear that the person who could have done this was lurking in the shadows all along. But it begs the question that if it wasn't Kevin, who did it and why? But let's continue in order. The investigation was initially assigned to Detective Mark Frost, who had never investigated a murder before. From day one, the investigation faced several problems. First, Kevin had seriously compromised the evidence by touching his girlfriend's body, hugging her and cradling her as he tried to bring Nona back to life. Second, multiple paramedics and police officers arrived at the scene, touching and moving potential evidence. Indeed, key evidence, such as the condom wrapper, the lamp, and Nona's cell phone, were moved multiple times, and their original locations were not recorded. As for the condom wrapper, police were unable to lift any fingerprints from it to determine whose they might have been. Nevertheless, within a week, the crime and the perpetrator were fully solved, according to police. And of course it was Kevin. The investigation was certain that he had deliberately created an elaborate disguise using his mother and a friend to help find the body and thereby throw suspicion off himself. He left a condom wrapper as a ruse to make it look like a stranger had taken advantage of Nona and killed her. The motive was Nona's alleged infidelity, which Kevin happened to learn about a few days before the crime. But no arrest followed. Despite the fact that the police believed Kevin was guilty, the investigation of the crime, led by Mark Frost, eventually took several months. During that period, from Nona's death to Kevin's arrest, rumors abounded around town. The police told Nona's mother, who had once loved Kevin, that Kevin was responsible for her daughter's death. They told her that he went on a rampage and killed Nona when he entered her apartment and saw a condom wrapper. That Nona was with another man. They believed he had staged the crime scene. On March 31, 2006, police finally announced the arrest of Kevin Jones for the murder of Nona Dirksmeyer. A whole new reality had set in for Kevin. The publicized evidence included what seemed to be irrefutable proof. Kevin's palm print was on the very lamp used to kill Nona. The murder of 19-year-old Nona Dirksmeyer came as a terrible shock to the city of Russellville, so it received more statewide publicity than any criminal case in years. Before the trial began, the defense asked for a change of venue, as the public was adamant about their suspicions and rumors, and the defense felt that Kevin would not get a fair trial. The request was granted, so the trial began in Ozark, which is almost 30 miles from Russellville. Jeff Phillips, an assistant prosecutor, presented Nona Dirksmeyer's case to the jury as a case of jealous boyfriend rage. According to the prosecutor, it was easy for Kevin to show up at Nona's apartment unannounced because he had a key. While there, he likely found a text message on Nona's phone from another man or a used condom in a package on the table. That's when he went on a rampage and attacked his girlfriend. He beat her, slashed her with a knife, and finally stabbed her with a heavy lamp base, leaving a bloody palm print on the bulb itself. Investigator Mark Frost, who discovered the palm print on the light bulb through forensics, determined that it was left there at the time of the crime, and not later when Kevin, his mother, and his friend discovered Nona's body. Lying on her body and then hugging her, the prosecution said, was a deliberate attempt to destroy evidence at the crime scene, and in fact police found very little usable evidence. But on the night the police questioned Kevin, they didn't think they would get straight answers, especially about his alibi, which according to the investigator, came together a little too well as of late. According to the prosecution, on the morning of the crime, Kevin left his Dover home around 10:30 a.m. as he waited for the plumber to leave. After that, Kevin's phone went silent for an hour and a half. The prosecution's chronology of events looked like this. 10:30 a.m. Kevin leaves Dover to visit Nona in Russellville. 10:55 a.m. He enters the apartment, argues with Nona, kills her, leaves his palm print on the light bulb. 11:10 a.m. Removes a condom wrapper from the scene. 11:15 a.m. Leaves back to Dover, returns around noon. There was one small snag in this prosecution chronology, however, and that was that Kevin's grandmother testified at trial that she saw her grandson at the gas station at 11:30 a.m. on December 15. According to her, she talked to him and gave him money for lunch. And if that were true, Kevin wouldn't have had time to drive to Nona's apartment and back, let alone kill her. There was only one piece of evidence at all, a bloody palm print on a light bulb. But maybe it's a completely innocent situation, and the blood got on the bulb the moment the body was discovered, when Kevin was trying to revive Nona. He could have just accidentally touched the light bulb. The EMT said the light bulb was about a foot away from the body. While they were digging into the case, attorneys said, they kept finding strange things in the investigation by first homicide detective Mark Frost. The only place where fingerprints were lifted appeared to be the area around the body. The police officers who inspected Nona's apartment after the attack did not pay proper attention to the blood near the front door, the blinds, which were also covered in blood, nor did they examine the bathroom for possible fingerprints. Nothing was done except in the area around the body. The bloody palm print was not the only evidence on the lamp. It turned out that later on, the police did manage to lift some fingerprints from the base of that lamp as well, and the prints that were on the working part of the murder weapon, the rod in the base, did not belong to Kevin Jones. They belonged to an unidentified person. The court learned that in addition to Kevin, Janice, and Ryan entering the apartment, so did several paramedics and police officers go around the crime scene, and some evidence was touched and moved. As for Kevin's palm print on the lamp, the same lamp that police said was the murder weapon, the defense argued that the palm print was on the lamp, and it could indeed have been when Kevin found Nona's body. Nona's cell phone was also found in the apartment, but it was not tested for fingerprints or DNA. Kevin's lawyers fought hard for his good name, proving to the court that there was no evidence against him at all. The defense used the testimony of Kevin's grandmother, which showed that he didn't have time to drive to and from Nona's apartment. The defense also told the jury that the perpetrator had several cuts and bruises on his hands and body after beating Nona. Police took pictures of Kevin, the front and back of his hands and his body when they spoke to him on December 15, and there were no bruises, scratches, or any abrasions on his body. Then there was a strange story about Nona's cell phone. It was at the scene, but the battery was missing. The perpetrator must have touched the phone since he removed the battery, the defense said, but the phone was never checked for fingerprints. The defense had been asking for months to take a look at the phone, perhaps to check its electronic history to see who Nona was texting or talking to. But when they finally got the phone and turned it over to a forensic scientist for information, they found that the device's memory had been wiped. The state then admitted to giving the phone to Nona's stepfather, Dwayne Diepert, stating that no more information could be obtained from it. The loss of the phone's memory was a blow because while phone company experts were able to recover messages sent to Nona, her responses, which could have identified the suspect, were lost forever. Remember the polygraph test? In court, the defense said it had checked the polygraph examiner's file and the person who administered the test was not a certified polygraph examiner. This was an attempt to pressure Kevin into confessing. There was an entire town watching who were largely convinced of Kevin's guilt. But was he guilty? The 5 jurors were very enthusiastic about the case. After 8 hours of deliberation, they returned to the courtroom, and they found Kevin Jones not guilty of the murder of Nona Dirksmeyer. An emotional dam burst in the courtroom after the acquittal was handed down. The decision devastated those who loved Nona and thought Kevin was at fault, but those who thought that was the end of it were very much mistaken, for this was only the beginning. Prosecutors were forced to say that the acquittal came after a botched police investigation. In the months that followed, Kevin and his family assigned Todd Steffi, a part-time police officer, to investigate the murder. Todd immediately sent the condom wrapper to be analyzed, and the lab found several traces of male DNA on it. Since this DNA did not belong to Kevin, authorities began looking for a needle in a haystack until an unrelated arrest forced Gary Dunn to visit the local police station. It was then that Todd Steffi was able to obtain his DNA and find a match to the one on the condom wrapper. On top of that, Todd also noticed that Gary had been out shopping on December 13th, not December 15th as he had reported in the first interview, which put a hole in his alibi. After prosecutors announced on February 6th, 2008, that the DNA on the condom wrapper matched Dunn's DNA, the prosecution team focused its attention on him. Gary Dunn was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The prosecution alleged that he either took advantage of Nona or attempted to do so before beating her to death. Gary Dunn and his wife lived in the same apartment complex as Nona. A police investigation later proved that Gary had been stalking the 19-year-old beauty queen 24/7, as his window was directly across the street from the victim's home. Interestingly, other residents of the complex insisted that Gary had recently moved into the neighborhood and said little about their new neighbor. He kept mostly to himself and rarely had friends in his apartment. In addition, several residents also mentioned that Gary had a troubled relationship with his wife. It remains a mystery how Gary Dunn was able to get into the apartment, as Nona's friends claimed that she always kept the door locked. The prosecutor suggested that Dunn might have knocked on Nona's door and introduced himself as her neighbor, who came to ask about her cat, because Nona's love of animals was known to others, and with Gary's daily surveillance, it would have been easy for him to find out. And indeed, at the scene, a bag of cat food was found on the floor, which had not been opened. When questioned, Gary's wife confirmed that he had been peeping on Nona for a long time in order to study her lifestyle. The girl pitied stray cats, taking them from the street, and it became a great excuse to get into her apartment. On December 15th, 2005, a neighbor knocked on her apartment under the pretext that he brought her stray kittens, and Nona opened the door. Then he broke in and attacked the girl, but Gary pleaded not guilty. When he was introduced in court, Gary's lawyers said that his DNA was a partial match to the one found at the crime scene, which meant that it was impossible to convict someone based on that evidence alone. In addition, the defense also argued that Kevin was the actual killer and should not have been allowed to go free. Such an argument instilled enough doubt in the minds of the jury, and the first trial ended in a mistrial. During the second trial, the court heard that Gary had previously been convicted of assaulting a woman back in 2002. It transpired that he had previously been charged with attempted murder and second-degree battery after he attacked a female jogger in Russellville. He was acquitted of the charges at that time, but found guilty of the second-degree battery charge and sentenced to 6 years in prison. The defense also questioned the DNA evidence. Prosecutors argued that Gary was linked to the crime scene by DNA found on a condom wrapper, while defense counsel disputed the alleged coincidence and argued that the evidence could not be trusted because of how it was collected and how the crime scene was contaminated. Gary's trial ended in a deadlock for the jury. They were never able to decide if he was guilty or not. A second trial was held, but the result was the same. However, the evidence was once again inconclusive, and the jury was divided for the second time. Although the second trial forced authorities to release Gary, he was sent to jail on a separate weapons charge before being arrested and convicted of kidnapping, attempted kidnapping, and indecent exposure for 2 unrelated incidents in 2019. Gary pleaded no contest to those charges and was sentenced to prison. So today Gary, who was sentenced to 15 years, is in custody at the Arkansas Department of Corrections office in Wrightsville, where he will remain at least until his parole eligibility date. Prosecutors had planned to try Gary a third time, but decided against it, and instead asked the judge to dismiss the charges against him. Despite this, the charges could be refiled. Kevin Jones was able to persevere through the unjust charges and sued the police, who investigated the situation for ignoring the facts and being irresponsible with the evidence. In 2010, he went on to study law. Kevin now works as a lawyer and is committed to helping those who suffer from police negligence or unprofessionalism. He currently resides in Little Rock, where he is happily married and engaged in a labor of love that has become his life's work. From Kevin Jones's interview, "Now I know exactly how it feels when people think you did something you didn't do, and I would never wish that on anyone else. I still sometimes have dreams with her, with Nona, and I see her there again and again." The conclusion of this story begs the fair question, will justice ever prevail for Nona? The life of a young, beautiful and talented girl, it will not return. But I want to believe that if the criminal did not receive his punishment from the people who represent the law on earth, then from God's punishment he will not be able to hide. It's just a matter of time. A young mother who never believed her husband would take her life. Manipulation is a type of social and psychological influence where one person seeks to change another person's perception and behavior for their own interests. Manipulators typically follow similar patterns, resorting to deception, blackmail, and moral or physical abuse. Often, their methods can be so intricate and cunning that the victim doesn't realize they are acting in the manipulator's interest. This frequently happens when the victim is in love with the manipulator and trusts only them. The case of Maria Fernanda Quesada was classified as femicide, a deliberate crime against a woman by a man. The most horrifying aspect of this crime was that it was entirely predictable, and those close to the girl considered the tragedy just a matter of time. Maria herself was afraid of her abusive husband, but loved him and wanted to keep the family together for the sake of their children, so she gave in to his manipulation. She blindly trusted her partner and did not sense danger when he invited her to a fateful meeting. Maria Fernanda Quesada. Childhood, family, and early years. A girl named Maria Fernanda Quesada was born on June 18, 1994, in the town of La Garita, located in the Guanacaste province in northern Costa Rica. She was the only child in the family, and her birth was a true miracle for the Quesada couple. Maria's mother had been treated for infertility for many years, and doctors had given up hope, claiming she would never have children. However, despite all the forecasts, she managed to conceive and gave birth to a healthy child. Her parents showered her with love and care, striving to protect her from all troubles and provide her with everything she needed. From a young age, Maria dreamed of having a large family with brothers and sisters, but her mother's health prevented her from having more children, so Maria remained an only child. The girl then decided that she would one day create a large, happy family of her own and have at least 3 children. The Quesadas worked hard and, by the standards of their native province, were considered well off. They aimed to give their only daughter the best education possible and fostered the development of her talents and abilities in every way. The family lived in a spacious, cozy home, and Maria had the opportunity to study music and attend art school. Maria had warm and trusting relationships with all family members, but she was especially close to her maternal aunt. Her mother's younger sister was only 6 years older than Maria, so they grew up as close friends, sharing secrets and being almost inseparable from a young age. Quesada excelled in school, had a creative nature, and was passionate about painting and sculpture. Those around her described her as a kind, bright, empathetic, and friendly person, always ready to lend a hand. She always had many friends, easily connected with people, and was very attractive. Single mother. At 18, Maria started dating a boy she had known since school. Their relationship developed quickly. The young man seemed reliable and loving to Maria, but everything fell apart when she told him she was pregnant. The young man, who was her age, was completely unprepared for family life and raising a child. He immediately suggested she terminate the pregnancy, and when she refused, he declared that their relationship was over. Maria was devastated, but still hoped that after the baby was born, the father would change his mind and come back. However, by then, her ex-boyfriend was already seeing someone else and wanted nothing to do with the son he had fathered. Maria's main support came from her parents and aunt, who helped and financially supported her and her son. The young mother knew she couldn't rely on her relatives forever and needed to provide for her son on her own. She began looking for ways to earn a living, wanting her work to bring her joy. Soon, she discovered online lessons on soap making and crafting decorative candles from wax. Being a creative person, Maria was drawn to this activity and saw great potential in it. Maria threw herself into making handmade candles and soap, selling her products online. She created social media groups to advertise her goods and took individual orders for custom candles and soap tailored to customers' specific preferences. Her business quickly gained momentum. Her social media following grew rapidly, and with it, so did her orders. She continuously improved her craft, aiming to become a top-notch artisan, and dreamed of saving enough money to open her own shop. Meanwhile, Maria also started teaching online soap-making classes, earning a decent income. She continued to live with her parents and son, saving for her own home, and dreamed of getting an education. A frightening suitor. Maria worked hard, but she never stopped dreaming of meeting a worthy man with whom she could build a strong, happy family, someone who would love her growing son as his own. Her loved ones shared this dream, but when she brought her new partner into their home, they were filled with anxiety and fear for her future. In the fall of 2017, Quesada went to the city to buy supplies for making soap and candles. While she was shopping, a charming young man named Esteban Rivera Vargas approached her. He paid her a few compliments, saying he was captivated by her beauty and couldn't resist coming over to introduce himself. Esteban seemed polite and genuine, quickly charming Maria and earning her trust, so she agreed to take a walk with him and have coffee. After a brief conversation, Maria gave him her phone number, marking the beginning of their unexpected romance. Esteban was 12 years older than Maria, but she didn't see the significant age difference as an obstacle to their happy future. She fell in love with him from the day they met, though it was a mystery to those around her what had won her over. Vargas was the complete opposite of Maria. He was harsh, rude, constantly used foul language, and had many bad habits. But most importantly, he never spoke about his past. Officially, he didn't have a job, but he had substantial savings that many suspected were obtained through dishonest means. Esteban owned a firearm, which he kept in the glove compartment of his old pickup truck. He rarely parted with the pistol, but never explained why. Maria suspected that her lover might be connected to the criminal world, but she was too afraid to ask him directly. She also knew nothing about his past relationships. About 4 months into their relationship, Maria decided to introduce Esteban to her family. She was very nervous about her parents' reaction, and it turned out she had every reason to be. Esteban behaved provocatively, was rude, used foul language, and any questions or remarks provoked anger and sudden outbursts. He openly frightened Maria's parents, and as soon as he left their home, they began urging their daughter to break off the relationship, fearing for her safety. However, Maria was not just in love. She was truly blinded by her feelings and refused to listen to any arguments. She naively believed that her love, care, and support would help her lover manage his fits of rage, that he would eventually calm down, settle, and become a good husband to her and a caring father to her son, as well as to the children they would have together, which she longed for, a family like his. A couple of weeks after meeting Quesada's parents, Esteban decided to introduce Maria to his family. He invited her to a family dinner at his mother's house, but the event turned into a nightmare for Maria. The Vargas family members were just as hot-tempered, aggressive, and arrogant as Esteban. They used foul language, communicated loudly, and any argument could instantly escalate into a fight. They treated their son's new love interest with disdain, making derogatory remarks, and even comparing her to his ex-girlfriends. They didn't like that Maria already had a child from a previous relationship, and they made no effort to hide their feelings. Maria held back tears of hurt and humiliation with all her might. To make matters worse, Esteban's relatives also had a fondness for strong drinks, and when intoxicated, they became even more aggressive and unpredictable. Maria found them cruel and malicious, a sentiment she candidly shared with her parents. Her father and mother once again tried to convince their daughter to break up with Esteban and stay away from him and his family. However, Maria remained adamant, believing that things would settle over time, especially since Esteban tried to behave himself when she was around. A hellish marriage. In December 2018, Maria told her partner that she was expecting his child. Esteban was not overly thrilled by the news, but he agreed that it was time for them to make their relationship official. The couple got married on April 6, 2019, when the bride was 4 months pregnant. They had a beautiful wedding with a white dress and a beachside ceremony. After the wedding, the newlyweds moved into a small house owned by Esteban. But from the very first days of their married life, he began to show his true colors. He no longer held back his outbursts of rage, threw tantrums over nothing, and didn't hesitate to use his fists. Insults, beatings, and humiliations became routine in their home, all witnessed by Maria's 5-year-old son. For several months, Maria not only endured all this, but also kept it secret from everyone. She avoided visiting her family so they wouldn't see the bruises on her face and body, wore long sleeves even in the heat, and carefully concealed the marks around her eyes with makeup to avoid attracting neighbors' attention. However, she grew increasingly fearful for the life of her unborn child and worried about how this situation would affect her older son. Maria believed that after the baby was born, Esteban would soften and fatherhood would do him good. She endured daily abuse, accusations, and humiliation, all while Esteban skillfully shifted the blame onto her, reminding her that he had accepted her with a child that no one else wanted. He expertly manipulated her emotions, knowing that the woman in love wouldn't leave, understanding how to frighten her and make her comply. Quesada was terrified of being alone again, this time with 2 children, and this became Esteban's primary lever of control. However, shortly before the birth, after another brutal beating, Maria hastily packed her things, took her son, and fled to her parents. They were shocked by her appearance, as there wasn't a single unmarked spot on her body, and urged her to go to the police, but she flatly refused. Caring father. In the last few weeks before giving birth, Maria lived in her parents' home, still hoping that the birth of her child would improve the situation, so she was in no hurry to file for divorce. Her family was less optimistic and urged her to end the marriage as soon as possible, but she wouldn't listen. On August 11, 2019, Maria gave birth to a son, and she immediately informed her husband by phone. Esteban rushed to the hospital within 15 minutes, looking happy yet bewildered. He got on his knees, begging his wife for forgiveness, pleading with her to return to him, and promising that everything would change now. Maria believed him and went home with the children after being discharged. It's needless to say that Quesada's parents were shocked by their daughter's decision. They understood that this was just a ploy and manipulation by their son-in-law, but Maria refused to listen. It all ended in a major argument, with Maria stating that if she had to choose, she would choose Esteban. Her parents didn't want to spoil their relationship with their only daughter or lose the chance to see their grandchildren, so they had to accept her decision. For the first few months, the new father did spend nearly all his time with his wife and newborn son. He surrounded them with care and even took on some household duties. However, he treated his stepson with a cool detachment. The stepfather didn't mistreat the boy, but it was evident that he was uncomfortable interacting with the child, although he tried not to show it. Moreover, Esteban officially got a job, and it seemed like he was doing everything for the well-being of his family. Maria couldn't be happier, as everything was now unfolding exactly as she had dreamed, but her happiness was fleeting and short-lived. Nonetheless, this brief respite even made Maria's relatives reassess their opinion of Esteban and believe that he had indeed changed for the better. Under one roof with a monster. The family idyll lasted precisely 1 year, but shortly after celebrating their son's first birthday, Esteban seemed to snap. All the anger, rage, and cruelty that he had been suppressing burst out, turning their home into a real torture chamber. He mercilessly beat his wife, broke several of her ribs, and nearly deprived her of an eye. In terror, Maria fled to her parents, who once again begged her to go to the police, but she refused. A few days later, Esteban came, apologized, and asked her to return home. To everyone's astonishment, Maria agreed, explaining that she still believed in her husband and hoped they could return to their previous happy life. Over the next few months, Maria repeatedly ended up in the hospital with serious injuries, but she always blamed everything on ridiculous household accidents to avoid involving the police. Neighbors regularly heard screams and shouting from the couple's house and even witnessed the man beating his wife. However, Maria always begged them not to call the authorities. People in the area were afraid of Esteban because they didn't know what to expect from him and feared he could attack at any moment. It wasn't until November 2021, when the situation reached a breaking point, that Maria, fearing for her life and the safety of her sons, contacted the police. She could no longer live under the same roof as a tyrant, manipulator, and outright sadist, so she moved back into her parents' home with her children. Moreover, she managed to obtain a restraining order against Esteban, prohibiting him from approaching her and the boys. Quesada documented the injuries, and doctors recorded numerous bruises, contusions, and abrasions of varying stages of healing on her body, indicating systematic and brutal beatings. Her relatives, as well as neighbors, confirmed that Vargas regularly assaulted his wife and threatened her with harm. As a result, the court forbade him from approaching his wife and contacting their child without her consent. However, the restraining order didn't deter Esteban, who regularly showed up at Quesada's house. He would wait for Maria to step outside and insist on talking, but she would always rush back inside to avoid him. Eventually, she only left the house accompanied by relatives, fearing an attack by her husband, a brutal attack and child abduction. Maria filed for divorce almost immediately, and now the couple faced a complicated process of dividing their assets and deciding custody of their son. She filed a lawsuit for domestic violence, supported by medical reports documenting her injuries and witness statements from neighbors and relatives. She hoped this would help her gain sole custody of the child. It was clear that Esteban had his own plans, and on March 3, 2022, despite the court order, he came to the house of his still legally married wife's parents. He looked completely calm, behaved politely, and asked to speak with Maria. Her parents tried to turn him away, but he was persistent. A few minutes later, Maria herself appeared at the door and agreed to talk to him privately. It's unclear what exactly Esteban said to her, but he was very convincing, and Maria agreed to go with him to their shared home to settle some issues. Moreover, she took their son with her because Esteban convinced her that he missed the child and wanted to spend time with him. Her parents were adamantly against their daughter and grandson going anywhere with this dangerous man, but Maria assured them that nothing bad would happen. She took the child, got into Esteban's car, and that was the last time her parents saw their only daughter alive. The couple started arguing in the car. By the time they reached their house, Esteban was yelling and using foul language at Maria, as witnessed and overheard by the neighbors. The couple, along with their young son, entered the house, where the situation escalated. The shouting didn't stop, and soon it was accompanied by loud crashes, as if furniture was being broken and dishes were being smashed. Then came the sound of a child crying and Maria's desperate call for help. Neighbors called emergency services, and a man living across the street rushed over to help. As he approached, the front door flew open, and Esteban appeared on the threshold, covered in blood. In one hand, he held the crying child, and in the other, a blood-stained knife. His gaze was wild, and his face twisted in rage. The neighbor backed off, fearing for the boy's life, while Vargas jumped into the car and sped away at high speed. When the police arrived, they found the mutilated body of a young woman with no signs of life. Maria lay in the kitchen in a pool of her own blood, with multiple stab wounds. Blood splatters were everywhere, on the walls, furniture, and even the ceiling, indicating the extreme brutality of the attack on the victim. Forensic experts counted 11 stab wounds on the deceased's body, most of which were concentrated on the upper torso and hands, which she had used to shield her face. It seemed that Esteban had attacked her from behind, catching her by surprise. This was evident from the 3 wounds in the neck and shoulder area from behind. Maria likely tried to escape, but her husband caught up with her and continued to stab her in the chest, head, and hands. Her body was found lying on its back, with the final stab wounds inflicted near the heart. Search for the criminal and the abducted child. There was no doubt about who had dealt with the unfortunate woman, but where was the criminal, and where did he take the child? A few hours later, Esteban's abandoned car was found on the side of a deserted road. Inside were traces of blood, and on the floor lay the weapon used in the crime, bearing the man's fingerprints. For obvious reasons, the criminal decided to get rid of the car, which had been declared wanted. He could have hitchhiked, taken a bus, or stolen another car. However, the options of public transport and hitchhiking were quickly dismissed because the man was in bloody clothes, which would have undoubtedly raised questions or suspicions. Most likely, he stole a vehicle to escape. An emergency manhunt was launched, as the police had strong reasons to believe that the criminal would attempt to cross the border into Nicaragua with the child within hours. Alerts with photos of Esteban and his young son were sent to all border checkpoints, and by evening, the fugitive was apprehended. The criminal had even managed to find a clean shirt somewhere, but bloodstains from the victim remained on his jeans and sneakers. As expected, he tried to leave the country in a stolen vehicle with his young son in the car, but he was arrested at passport control. The man did not resist and immediately asked for a lawyer. A gun belonging to Esteban, with his fingerprints, was also found in the stolen vehicle. Crime investigation. The crime was initially classified as femicide, a crime against a woman due to her gender, which is considered a particularly serious offense in Latin American countries and is usually punished with life imprisonment. All the evidence pointed to Esteban: the bloody knife with his fingerprints, the blood stains on his clothes, and the neighbors' testimonies confirming that besides him, Maria, and the child, no one else was in the house. Moreover, the investigation revealed that the man had previously been charged multiple times for assaults and causing bodily harm. However, the only eyewitness to the crime was a 2.5-year-old boy. So, the criminal and his lawyers adopted a specific strategy. Esteban claimed that Maria had attacked him, and he was only defending himself from an enraged woman, panicking and grabbing the knife. The man argued that he didn't even remember how he inflicted the wounds and only realized what had happened when his wife fell silent. At the same time, the Vargas family tried to tarnish the deceased's reputation, calling her a bad mother, a terrible wife, a troublemaker, and unfaithful. The defendant's relatives claimed that Maria provoked Esteban, attacked him, and this ultimately led to the tragedy. They did everything to portray the criminal as a victim of circumstances. The lawyers insisted that the greedy Quesada family intended to take all his property and deprive him of the chance to see his son. During the investigation, it was even necessary to exhume the body of the victim, who had been buried a week after the crime. Independent experts refuted Esteban's and his defense's claims that Maria had attacked him first, once again confirming that the first 3 blows were inflicted on her from behind. Trial and sentence. The trial of the criminal began only in March 2023, meaning the defendant and his lawyers had plenty of time to build a convincing defense. However, various activist organizations fighting for women's rights supported the Quesada family, joined by crowds of people demanding just punishment for the criminal. The deceased's eldest son, who was 9 years old at the time, could testify in court and spoke about the stepfather's cruel treatment of his mother. The younger child, who witnessed the crime, was only 2.5 years old at the time. Psychologists worked with him and determined that the boy had a deep-seated fear of kitchen knives, screaming, "Daddy, don't," whenever he saw one. The child mentioned that his father had hurt his mother and that everything turned red. These materials were submitted to the court, but the child was not brought into the courtroom to avoid further trauma. Numerous witnesses, including neighbors, relatives, and acquaintances, testified against Esteban, recalling how he had shown aggression toward his wife at various times. Dozens of people had also regularly seen bruises and contusions on the young woman's body, and shortly before the start of the divorce proceedings, the police had documented signs of beatings. On May 15, 2023, Esteban Rivera Vargas was found guilty of the premeditated crime against his wife and sentenced to 36 years in a maximum security prison. Custody of the deceased woman's 2 children was granted to her relatives. The insane courier of death. How quickly would you open your door if a stranger knocked? Would you inquire about their identity and purpose before unlocking? Most people would, as a reasonable precaution. However, if a courier in a uniform with a package in hand stood on your doorstep, would you still ask questions or would you open right away? Typically, couriers do not arouse suspicion or concern, and people tend to let them in even when they aren't expecting any delivery. In the summer of 2020, amid the pandemic and total lockdown, when couriers became almost the sole link between people and the outside world, delivering everything from food and essential medicines to work documents, one such delivery person was bringing death to homes. A masked man with a pistol seemed elusive, and it was unclear who his next visit would target. The police, without any leads, were afraid to spread panic. But soon the case took a completely unexpected turn. A fatal incident involving a well-known lawyer. This convoluted story, as it later turned out, had begun many years ago, but its tragic development occurred on July 11th, 2020, in a prestigious cottage area southeast of Los Angeles. There, in one of the elite houses, renowned lawyer Mark Angelucci was waiting out the pandemic, isolated in his spacious mountain estate. Like many others, he continued to work remotely, hoping for the situation in the country and the world to improve. On that day, the 52-year-old homeowner wasn't expecting any visitors or deliveries, but when a courier in FedEx Corporation uniform rang his doorbell with a package in hand, the man, without hesitation, opened the door. The lawyer probably thought that one of his partners or clients had sent some important documents, forgetting to inform him. Nothing indicated trouble, and the person on the doorstep did not seem alarming or suspicious. The courier, appropriately wearing a special protective mask and gloves for that period, had a parcel and an invoice that required a signature. However, as soon as the lawyer was about to receive the package, the delivery person suddenly drew a pistol and fired several shots at close range, aiming for vital organs to ensure the lawyer would be fatally injured. The lawyer had no chance to react, and being unarmed in his home robe, he had no chance of survival. After the deed, the courier simply left the scene, leaving the victim bleeding out on the floor. Since the house was in a rather secluded location, none of the neighbors noticed anything unusual, though sounds resembling shots did prompt them to call emergency services and report the disturbing incident. No leads at all. Mark Angelucci succumbed to his injuries at the scene, and the arriving medics and law enforcement could only confirm he was dead. Upon examining the crime scene, detectives immediately dismissed the notion that robbery was the criminal's motive. The house was truly luxurious, adorned with antique items containing a safe and visibly expensive possessions, yet everything remained untouched. In the lawyer's home office lay a mass of important documents concerning various cases, but these too did not interest the perpetrator. Everything in the house was left undisturbed, nothing was searched or moved, and the criminal did not even cross the threshold of the home. Thus, from the very beginning, the main objective was clearly to eliminate the homeowner. The criminal was caught on several outdoor surveillance cameras, but as he was wearing a company cap from FedEx and a medical mask, it was virtually impossible to discern any distinctive features. All that could be determined was that he was a white male, of average height and slender build. The criminal wore gloves, thus leaving no fingerprints anywhere. Essentially, the only evidence consisted of bullets extracted from the deceased's body. The police were baffled, and initially they decided to investigate the people closest to the lawyer, to understand who might wish him harm and who might benefit from his death. The possibility that the crime was related to his professional activities was also not ruled out. Therefore, it was also necessary to examine which cases the lawyer had been handling recently, whether he had any dissatisfied clients, and whether he had conflicts with any colleagues. There was a vast amount of work to be done, and determining a priority direction seemed impossible at the moment. So they decided to start with the relatives and close friends of the lawyer. Rich, successful, and utterly alone. It soon emerged that Mark was profoundly lonely. No, he had quite a few friends, got along well with colleagues and neighbors, but he had no truly close or familial relationships. His parents had long passed away, Angelucci had no siblings, and he never started his own family. In his youth, the man diligently studied, then he tirelessly built a career in legal practice, where he achieved great heights and recognition. But he intentionally decided to sacrifice his personal life, so at 52, he had never been married and had no heirs. Mark was quite attractive, intelligent, eloquent, always dressed expensively and stylishly, lived in a luxurious home, and drove a luxury car. He was rich and successful, and wherever this man appeared, he literally drew the attention of women, but he did not engage in romances or intrigues, and in principle, always kept his personal life hidden from everyone. This led to many rumors about his orientation, but the lawyer himself never confirmed nor denied them. In his list of contacts, they found a woman named Cassie J., with whom the deceased was very close. Their relationship was not romantic, but rather akin to brotherly sisterly love. She was a journalist and had met the lawyer many years ago while preparing a report on a high-profile case he was handling. The man willingly agreed to help her. They quickly found common ground, got along well, and continued to communicate after their joint work ended. For Cassie, the news of the death of her close friend was a real shock. She described Mark as sincere, kind, and responsive, with an easygoing and cheerful nature, who was involved in charity and always responded to others' troubles. According to her, he had no enemies, at least she was unaware of their existence. But in recent years, he had been among the top lawyers in California and had not lost a single case, so he undoubtedly made some adversaries whom he might not even suspect. The anti-feminist and men's rights advocate. During the investigation, a rather intriguing detail emerged. It was discovered that the lawyer held anti-feminist views, but also supported traditional notions of men and women in family and society without harboring any animosity towards women. He opposed discrimination against men in matters such as child custody, which almost always tend to favor women. Angelucci was a fighter for justice, not male supremacy. He took on some complex cases completely free of charge, helping those who found themselves in trouble. The lawyer noted that with the rise of feminist organization activity, men were almost always presumed guilty from the start in any conflict and doomed to defeat, with no chance to prove their innocence. Over the years, Mark became an activist for men's rights, although in fact, he simply sought to equalize rights for all people, ensuring that everyone could expect a fair judicial resolution in conflict situations regardless of gender. Given this, it was not possible to exclude the likelihood that radically minded representatives of feminist organizations could have been involved in the lawyer's demise, as the deceased had no family or close people, and there were no leads or clues in the case. The investigation could have stalled and eventually been archived. In response, Cassie J. decided to take initiative. Using her extensive connections in the media, the journalist brought widespread attention to the case, prompting law enforcement to conduct a more thorough investigation. Detectives carefully reviewed the case files that the lawyer had been handling recently, hoping to find any hints. The task was daunting, but before they could find anything, the courier criminal struck again. Collateral victims, or was the entire family targeted? On July 19, 2020, just a week after the first crime, on the other side of the country in New Jersey, an armed courier paid a visit to the luxurious home of a state federal judge. That day, none of the family members were expecting any deliveries or packages, and they were all self-isolating. Both parents, being lawyers, continued to work remotely, and their college student son was on holiday. The head of the family, a 62-year-old lawyer named Mike Anderl, first noticed the approaching courier while he was on the second-floor balcony of his home. He thought that perhaps some work-related documents awaited his wife and hurried downstairs to open the door. However, his son, who was closer to the front door, opened it without a second thought. They exchanged just a few words before a shot rang out. Mike was descending the stairs at that time, and likely he was the initial target, but his 20-year-old son, Daniel, literally stood between his father and the criminal. The young man took a bullet to the chest, fell to the floor, and the criminal opened fire on the lawyer, wounding him 3 times. The courier, as in the previous case, did not enter the premises but simply turned around and left, leaving the bleeding victims to die. However, there was another person in the house, Judge Esther Salas, who was the wife and mother of the victims. The woman, shortly before the incident, had gone down to the basement to sort through things and did not hear the gunshots. When she came upstairs, she first saw her son lying in a pool of blood at the door. Esther rushed to him, tried to stem the wound, called out for her husband's help, and only then saw that a bloodied Mike was lying on the stairs. Salas immediately called emergency services, reporting the incident, and tried to provide aid to her husband and son herself. By the time law enforcement and paramedics arrived, both men were alive but in extremely critical condition. They were immediately taken to the nearest hospital, where they underwent surgery and, it seemed, their condition was stabilized. The criminal's motive was unclear, and it was also uncertain whether he came to end the life of the judge, her lawyer husband, a former prosecutor, or intended to eliminate the entire family. Again, no traces or clues were found at the scene, and the only evidence consisted of bullets fired at the victims. The Federal Bureau of Investigation joined the case, immediately suspecting a connection between this incident and the murder of Mark Angelucci in California. In both cases, the targets were lawyers, and the shooter disguised himself as a FedEx courier. However, the agents were confident that in the second case, the true target was the judge, and her relatives were merely collateral victims. Eyewitnesses' final account. Ballistic analysis established that the shooter used a 380 caliber pistol in both incidents, and all bullets were fired from the same weapon. This dispelled any remaining doubts that the acts were committed by the same individual. But who was this person? Where could he be found? And where, when, and to whom might he strike next? It was necessary to question the surviving witness who had come face to face with the criminal, and had even exchanged a few words. After a serious surgery, Daniel was in the intensive care unit in critical condition, but when he regained consciousness, he expressed a desire to speak with detectives to tell them everything he had seen. The young man couldn't describe the perpetrator's appearance because he was masked, but he thought the individual was elderly, as he could see gray at the temples, wrinkles around the eyes, and the courier's hands appeared old. Behind the courier, near the road, Daniel noticed a light-colored car, though he couldn't remember the make. The student also speculated that the criminal's target might have been his mother, as the attacker had inquired if she was home. However, at that moment, his father appeared on the stairs, apparently startling the criminal. The attacker quickly drew his pistol, shot the young man in the chest, and then began shooting at Mike, wounding him 3 times. After being injured, Daniel remembered nothing until he woke up in the hospital. The student's testimony provided little help to the investigation except to confirm that the shooter was an older white male. Regrettably, Daniel's condition could not be stabilized. He worsened, and the day after speaking with law enforcement, the 20-year-old passed away in the hospital from a resultant internal bleeding. Who is Esther Salas? Thus, detectives unanimously concluded that the main target of the shooter was indeed Esther Salas, but her husband and son were inadvertently in the way, and now the young man was deceased, while his father still hovered between life and death. It was urgent to understand what linked Salas and the earlier deceased Angelucci, what cases they were handling, and if they had common adversaries. Esther Salas was born in 1968 in Monterey Park, California. She had Cuban roots on her mother's side and Mexican on her father's. The girl who grew up in poverty achieved everything in life through her intellect and hard work. She attended Rutgers University for law school and earned her Juris Doctor in 1994. She built a stellar career, progressing from a clerk to an assistant U.S. public defender and eventually to a United States magistrate judge in New Jersey. She also served several years as the president of the Hispanic Lawyers Association. Since 2011, she had been a judge for the U.S. District Court for the District of New Jersey. In 1993, Esther married renowned lawyer Mike Andrell, who was 11 years her senior. The couple desperately dreamed of having a child, but Esther struggled to conceive. After 4 consecutive miscarriages, doctors declared that she would never have children. However, a miracle happened on July 13, 2000, when the couple's only child, a son named Daniel, was born. The spouses adored their child, raising him in an atmosphere of love and care, striving to provide him with the best education and wide opportunities in life. Unfortunately, just a week after the young man celebrated his 20th birthday, he was gone. An unexpected turn in the case. News about a courier criminal operating across the country went viral on the internet, spreading rapidly and sowing panic among the population. With no precise information available about the investigation, wild rumors about the case began to emerge. People simply feared opening their doors to couriers, even though during the pandemic, they were often the bearers of necessities. Several days later, on a deserted dead-end road near Rockland in northern New York, an abandoned beige sedan was found. Nearby lay the body of a man with a gunshot wound to the head. Documents found in the car quickly helped identify the deceased as 72-year-old Roy Den Hollander, a once successful lawyer. Near the body lay a pistol, and the scene resembled a self-deprivation of life, as there were no signs of struggle or the presence of third parties. These assumptions were soon confirmed, as the murder weapon bore only the victim's fingerprints. However, the weapon itself drew significant interest from investigators. It was a .380 caliber pistol, identical to the one used to end the lives of Mark Angelucci and Daniel Andrell. Ballistic analysis soon confirmed that all 3 men were deprived of life by bullets fired from this pistol. Yet, it remained unclear what motivated the shooter to end the lives of 2 men, injure another, and then fire a bullet into his own head. A search of Hollander's home indicated that he had meticulously planned the attacks in advance. His diary contained addresses of the victims and notes on the dates of the attacks. Detectives, however, could not understand the criminal's motive. However, when they found memoirs on his laptop, which Roy had been working on for years, it became clear that he was a mentally unstable individual, embittered and angry at the world, who despised everyone from his own mother and ex-wife to his neighbors, colleagues, and clients. It was only a matter of time before he would take up arms and begin to end lives. Who was Roy Den Hollander? Roy Den Hollander was born on September 26, 1947, in Midland Park, New Jersey. He had an older fraternal twin brother who died under mysterious circumstances in childhood. Roy blamed his mother for this his entire life, a sentiment he openly discussed in his memoirs, along with his hatred for his parents. He graduated from high school in 1965, then attended the prestigious George Washington University Law School, and later earned an MBA from Columbia Business School. He worked as a lawyer at several renowned firms, and in the late 1990s, he moved to Russia, where he lived for several years, working as a lawyer and private detective at Kroll Associates, a consulting firm specializing in financial issues and risk. Hollander earned significant money, which he immediately spent in various elite entertainment venues on young, beautiful women, who were his main weakness. In 2000, at a Moscow nightclub, the 52-year-old American lawyer met a 24-year-old beauty named Angelina Cipollina. Previously a professional track athlete, she later decided to switch to modeling, possessing all the attributes necessary to succeed in that field. The aspiring model quickly realized that the older American was utterly infatuated with her and decided to use him for her purposes. She swiftly swept him off his feet and gently nudged him towards marriage. After moving to the United States and obtaining a marriage visa, she soon filed for divorce. Now, Angelina could legally stay in the country and pursue her modeling career. For the lawyer, this turn of events was a huge blow. He realized that the beauty had merely used him to achieve her own goals, playing with his emotions. He came to despise all women, a sentiment he eloquently expressed in his memoirs. He referred to his former wife as a venal woman, willing to do anything for money, and also accused her of connections with the Russian mafia. Fundamental stance and puzzling motives for the crimes. Following his tumultuous divorce from Cipollina, Roy became a self-proclaimed anti-feminist and an active advocate for men's rights. However, his behavior grew increasingly eccentric and flamboyant. Unlike Angelucci, who provided free assistance to men affected by domestic abuse and handled custody issues during divorces, Hollander became notorious for his frivolous and unsuccessful lawsuits. For instance, he objected to ladies' night promotions in bars and nightclubs where women are offered free admission and complimentary drinks. Yet, it remained unclear why Roy chose his victims and sought to deprive them of life. The situation with Angelucci was particularly puzzling, since they were effectively colleagues, both fighting for men's rights. The answer to this question was soon found in the criminal's memoirs. It turned out that Roy saw Mark as a rival and was extremely jealous of him because Mark was far more successful in his career, commanded widespread respect, and held considerable influence, whereas Hollander had been mostly ridiculed for his antics and bizarre lawsuits over the last decade. Furthermore, both lawyers were members of the same men's rights community, making Roy appear even more outlandish and unsuccessful by contrast. About a year before these tragic events, he was expelled from the community for aggressive and inappropriate behavior. Roy's personal life and career spiraled downward after his divorce from the Russian model. He fell into depression, developed problems with alcohol and anger management, and started losing most of the cases he took on. Esther Salas, as a judge, presided over several cases Hollander had handled at different times, consistently ruling against him, which led him to long-list her as one of his sworn enemies. However, neither Salas, Angelucci, nor any of their colleagues considered Roy to be dangerous. But in 2018, when he was diagnosed with cancer, the lawyer likely felt he had nothing left to lose and began devising a plan for revenge and the elimination of his enemies. The long list of revenge. Hollander never made explicit threats, so it was difficult to determine whom he considered his enemies. However, in his memoirs and notebooks, a lengthy list of names was found with whom the lawyer apparently planned to settle scores. This list included not only judges and fellow lawyers, but also the doctors who treated him, whom he accused of incompetence and intentionally treating him poorly, allowing his disease to progress. Detectives checked all the other individuals on the list and, ensuring they were alive, warned them of potential danger, as it was unclear whether the criminal had acted alone or had accomplices. It also remained unclear why Roy stopped and unexpectedly settled accounts with life. There was speculation that this was due to the deteriorating state of his health. Hollander's memoirs contained over 2,000 pages. Also, about a dozen notebooks and diaries were found among his personal belongings, which needed to be meticulously examined. This process took several weeks, but ultimately established that the criminal acted alone and had no accomplices, meaning that everyone else on the list was safe following Roy's death. Daniel Anderl's Law. After the attack, Mike Anderl spent over half a year in the hospital undergoing a challenging rehabilitation process due to 3 gunshot wounds. His wife, Esther Salas, remained in a prolonged state of depression due to the loss of their only son. However, in February 2021, she agreed to give an extensive interview for the television news magazine 60 Minutes, where she spoke publicly for the first time about the horrific events and the tragedy that struck their family. Simultaneously, the judge began working on legislative changes in New Jersey. A new law, adopted in December 2021, was named after her late son, Daniel. The new amendments introduced a prohibition on the public disclosure of judges' addresses and other contact information, ensuring the safety and privacy of public officials and their family members. The costs of the profession. Under the law, an investigation must be conducted fully, comprehensively, and objectively. However, as practice shows, crime investigations aren't always approached properly. Society often turns a blind eye to what's happening, justifying its indifference with absurd reasons like, it's his own fault. As a result, the victims' families are left alone with their grief and uncertainty. In the story to be discussed, everything was biased, from the search for a missing girl to the lengthy investigation and court proceedings. The criminal case was closed after 10 years. It was only thanks to the persistent efforts of the parents, a change of detective, and external intervention. Today, we will try to understand why the body of a young beauty was found in one of the livestock burial grounds, who was responsible for her death, and why such an attitude was formed towards the unfortunate victim. Disappearance. 19-year-old Kara Nichols disappeared on October 9, 2012, in the 6,700 block of Colorado Springs, Colorado, USA. She was last seen wearing a hooded sweatshirt, dark-colored jeans, white DC sneakers, and pink headphones. The tall blonde with green eyes had 2 tattoos, a marijuana leaf on her right ankle and an astronaut on her left wrist. She also had numerous piercings on her back, ears, and above her lip. Flyers distributed around the city listed these and other distinctive features of her appearance. Information that the missing person was suffering from bipolar or borderline personality disorder was also provided. The first to suspect something was wrong was her older brother Terrence. Later, Julia and Paul Nichols, Kara's parents, joined the search operation. The family knew that despite her use of banned substances, she always made contact and reported on her whereabouts. However, when the girl did not call back on October 10th and 11, her relatives became worried. They were always concerned about her, but she wanted to live a free life and refused to comply. Recently, she had become more distant and communicated only with her brother. Modeling, her occupation, was not yielding the desired income. Therefore, when she was offered a substantial paycheck for a lingerie photo shoot, she gladly accepted. She informed her roommates about her upcoming plans and left late at night. The shoot was scheduled for early morning in Denver, making the trip more convenient. Moreover, she was not traveling alone, but was accompanied by colleagues in the business. The girls, having no driver's licenses or a car, fortunately found a suitable driver. Kara's story raised no doubts. Acquaintances had seen her work portfolios multiple times, and her social media accounts were filled with professional photographs. Everything would have been fine, except that Nichols did not return the next day, nor the day after. The last time Terrence spoke with his sister was at 11:45 p.m. on October 9th. However, their conversation was unexpectedly cut off, after which she did not call back. Then the brother thought that the connection was lost, so he calmly went to sleep, knowing that they would definitely talk in the morning. However, on October 10th, Kara ignored all attempts to contact her. Her voicemail was continuously active. The brother again assumed she was busy or resting after work, and he waited for the model to appear on her own. But even on October 11th, there was no news from her. The brother's worry increased. Such silence was not typical for his close relative. In connection with this, Terrence visited her home, where he talked to neighbors. None of them had seen the friend for several days. One young man reported seeing Kara get into a dark-colored sedan around 11 p.m. Unfortunately, he could not see who was driving. The darkness hindered him. However, he mentioned that it seemed she was not alone. After that, Terrence entered his sister's room and looked around. His attention was drawn to the girl's personal items, which she never went without. Among them were a cosmetics bag, purse, charger, and laptop. $300 in cash lay on the bedside table. Clearly, Kara had not planned a prolonged absence. Then the brother turned on her laptop. It became clear that she had not been online for more than 2 days. This was out of character for the aspiring model, who promptly kept up with job offers. Convinced that his concern was not in vain, Terrence decided to report to the police. At the station, he recounted everything in order. However, the law enforcement officers were not in a hurry with the search. The officers claimed that Kara was old enough. She was not obligated to report her whereabouts to everyone. The police suggested that the girl might have been delayed at the shoot or went somewhere else. Maybe she had a boyfriend that no one knew about, and she was spending time with him. Nevertheless, the police's arguments did not satisfy the applicant. He knew his sister well. No matter what happened, she would have definitely made contact by now. Terrence insisted that something bad had happened to her. Nevertheless, the police did not take the boy's words seriously and advised him to come back later. The life of Kara Nichols. Kara Nichols was born on May 20th, 1993, and was the middle child in her family. She spent her childhood with her older brother and younger sister, growing up sociable and friendly, often surrounded by her family. Kara excelled in school and had a keen interest in art, particularly painting. As a talented child, she won several art competitions and was predicted to have a promising future. Yet she was sensitive, deeply feeling the pain of others as her own. During her teenage years, her behavior shifted. Kara became introverted and her academic performance declined. At 13, she was arrested for shoplifting, which resulted in a sentence of community service. Her parents were baffled by the sudden change, as they had always been attentive and loving. She had never wanted for anything, so her theft was likely a form of rebellion against established norms. At 16, Kara's mental health began to falter following the loss of her beloved dog, which plunged her into a deep depression. Her parents sent her to a psychologist, but the sessions proved ineffective, and her condition worsened. Eventually, she was admitted to a psychiatric hospital where she was diagnosed with a personality disorder. After a brief treatment, she showed improvement with the help of prescribed medications. However, due to severe side effects, Kara gradually stopped taking them and worsened her unstable mental state by using banned substances, believing them to be a better alternative to antipsychotics. Behavioral issues led her to attend several alternative schools until she finally graduated. After high school, Kara worked as a waitress and pursued her childhood dream of becoming a model. Her appearance was promising, and she sincerely believed she could succeed in the field. She diligently searched for modeling agencies and worked on her portfolio. During this time, her health noticeably improved, and she even quit her harmful addiction. However, as time passed, she realized that beauty alone was insufficient for a successful modeling career. Luck and extensive connections were necessary. In the summer of 2012, the Nichols family moved to Chicago, Illinois. However, the new city did not welcome Kara, and her depression returned. Stress led her to resume her harmful habit, despite her parents' support and attempts to help by enrolling her in a drug rehabilitation program, which she was soon expelled from for refusing to follow the rules. The Nichols were at a loss on how to guide her and were deeply concerned about where she was getting the money for her addiction, since her small waitress salary was clearly insufficient. After discontinuing her treatment, Kara's parents became disillusioned. Her psychological state fluctuated daily. After brief discussions, she decided to return to her hometown, believing that familiar surroundings and social circles would help restore her to life. Her family disliked the idea but could not persuade her to stay. Eventually, Kara returned to Colorado Springs. Terrence promised to look after her, and their open and warm relationship somewhat reassured the parents. However, Kara wanted independence and did not stay with her brother, only visiting him occasionally. She rented an apartment with other male tenants, shocking her parents when they learned she was living under the same roof with 3 men. They demanded she find other housing, but she refused. explaining that she had no better options and had found the men to be harmless. Gradually, everything went back to normal. Kara returned to her previous job and continued modeling work by creating a profile on Model Mayhem. Over time, she received more offers, but they did not lead to the expected results. Breaking into the desired world among thousands of profiles was challenging. Later, Kara faced problems. She fell behind on rent and even borrowed food from her roommates. She discussed these issues with her brother, who also supported her financially. Thus, she was determined not to miss the opportunity presented to her on October 9th. However, no one expected that night to be her last. Investigation. After being turned away at the police station, Terrence reached out to his parents. The eldest son recounted what had happened and asked for help, knowing that in such cases, collective pressure was necessary. As soon as the family learned of their daughter's disappearance, they immediately flew to Colorado Springs. Kara's cell phone was still turned off, and it was also discovered that she had not shown up for the job she valued so much, confirming their worst fears. Convinced, the Nichols family as a whole went to the police. Law enforcement was compelled to respond to their report. Eventually, the El Paso County Sheriff's Office acknowledged that the circumstances of her disappearance raised questions. Detectives reached out to local residents asking for any information about the girl's whereabouts. At the same time, the parents allowed investigators access to her cell phone data. Experts confirmed that the last message Kara sent was to her brother. Based on cellular provider data, it was known that on October 9th, her mobile device was indeed headed north, but was then turned off. Friends and acquaintances also joined the search efforts, distributing flyers throughout Colorado Springs and Denver. After talking with her close contacts, investigators examined other means of communication used by the girl, particularly her laptop. Thus, early in the investigation, a secret the girl had closely guarded from her family was revealed. Some of her modeling work, posted on websites, served as a cover for the escort services she had been involved in since she was 17. This was how Paul and Julia learned the true source of Kara's livelihood. However, there was not enough time to recover from the shock. Consent was needed to disclose this information to get new leads. At the same time, this circumstance could significantly affect the investigation and decrease public interest. Unfortunately, there are many examples where the perception of the victim was notably distorted in such cases. The Nichols didn't want to air their dirty laundry, but were forced to do so in the hope of an exception. However, no miracle occurred. After the new details were published, news agencies began canceling interviews with Kara's family one by one. Coverage of the disappearance waned. The search for the girl hit a dead end. The only organization that took up helping with the investigation was the National Women's Coalition Against Violence and Exploitation. They ensured that the community and authorities did not forget about the missing model. Search for witnesses. In November 2012, detectives announced their intention to speak with two women who were believed to have been in the car with Kara on the fateful night. Some even described their appearance. They possibly belonged to the same line of work as the missing girl. Undoubtedly, the witnesses were of interest to the investigation, but were not considered suspects. Most likely, these women were the last to see her alive. A composite sketch of one of them was made publicly available. However, hopes that someone would come forward proved vain. Later, even the testimony of their existence was doubted. The investigation stalled again. That month, Kara's photos appeared on an escort service website in Las Vegas. However, detectives found that the girl had not been involved in the posting. Someone had decided to capitalize on her popularity. Subsequently, the Nichols profile was removed. Concerned citizens periodically approached the police station. However, after verification, their reports turned out to be false. In the spring of 2013, a businessman from Colorado Springs claimed to have seen the sought-after woman from the end of October through December 2012. She was with a tall, unkempt man. The woman appeared frightened, as if she was being forcibly held and made to do something. One day, her companion pushed her, which did not escape the notice of a bystander. He threatened the man and asked him to leave the lady alone. The eyewitness's statement was verified. The police managed to find the man described, but detectives confirmed that the woman with him was his former girlfriend. In the autumn of the same year, a criminal law student decided to investigate Kara's case independently. He traveled to Denver and spoke with many homeless people and substance users. Some of them reported seeing the missing woman at a non-profit organization dealing with the exchange of syringes and needles for those using banned substances. However, it later turned out that the lead was false, and so it was with every testimony. Many had already given up hope of finding the story's heroine alive. Too much time had passed for this type of case. In the summer of 2013, the girl's parents announced a reward for any information regarding their daughter's whereabouts. But it all seemed futile. Kidnapping for ransom was ruled out as no demands had been made over the months. A new development. The following year brought a sensational breakthrough that spurred movement in the investigation. In May 2014, Deputy Sheriff Cliff Porter admitted to having cut corners in the investigation. Unexpectedly, he disclosed that he had not given enough attention to Kara Nichols's case and, most importantly, had overlooked substantial evidence that could have played a critical role in the early stages of the investigation. This confession shocked the Nichols family, as they felt the investigation into their daughter's disappearance had been treated carelessly due to her line of work. The inadequate handling of cell phone records called into question the entire office's conduct. The authorities' inaction did not go unnoticed. Numerous audits brought discipline to the department, and those responsible were removed from their positions. In May 2016, former Sheriff Terry Makita and members of his staff were charged with corruption, fabricating witness testimony, kidnapping, and extortion. This convinced the victim's family that their relative's case had never been appropriately handled. Nevertheless, this event provided a new impetus for the investigation. Thanks to a change in detectives in February 2022, the missing woman's body was discovered. She was found buried in a grave alongside a horse's corpse on a farm near Colorado Springs. But let's go through the details in order. The suspect. On February 1st, 2022, a woman named Christina Hollendorfer walked into the police station. Detectives had tried to speak with her several times before, but she had refused to cooperate. Since 2014, the witness had been unwilling to testify against her former husband, Joel. However, years later, she broke her silence and accused her ex of murdering Kara Nichols. An examination of the missing girl's calls and messages revealed that she had received 8 calls between 9:58 and 11:08 p.m. on October 9th, most of which were from a man named Joel Hollendorfer. Detectives had interrogated him several times, but beyond general information, they discovered little. He admitted to having hired the woman's services and had planned to meet her from the evening of October 9th to the morning of October 10th. However, the meeting never occurred. The escort did not make it to him. His statement raised suspicions, especially since the geolocation data from Kara's mobile device indicated that on the night of her disappearance, she was near the suspect's parents' house. On October 15, 2014, a search was conducted at the man's and his family's home. At the time of the search, detectives spoke with Joel and his mother, Betty. They noted their calm and friendly demeanor. It did not appear that they were hiding anything. They kindly showed the entire property, including several fresh burial sites for deceased animals. It should be noted that the Hollendorfer family had owned the farm since 1985 and had a large livestock yard. Dogs trained to find human remains searched the area. They reacted to some of the livestock graves a few times. However, further examination of their contents revealed nothing suspicious. It was possible that the dogs confused the scent of dead animals with that of a human. To definitively rule out Joel's involvement in the crime, samples from some suspicious areas were collected for analysis. However, the tests showed that the samples were unrelated to the case. Nonetheless, suspicions about the man were not lifted. It turned out that Hollendorfer had a history of harassment and violating restraining orders. He was a hardened criminal who had repeatedly violated the terms of his parole. Moreover, he had used banned substances, which had contributed to the breakdown of his family. the investigation had approached his ex-wife at least twice. During conversations, it was established that Christina and Joel were raising 2 children. Initially, the woman was reluctant to share details of their life together and later refused to communicate altogether. Thus, along with other theories regarding Kara's disappearance, Joel remained the only suspect. Finally, after 8 years, his identity was exposed. Mrs. Hollendorfer claimed that in November 2014, her ex-husband confessed to her that he had accidentally ended the life of a hired escort and buried her body in an old horse grave. She learned about this after the death of her father-in-law. When the funeral was over, her former husband revealed that he felt guilty about his father's death. According to her, he confessed to his parents what he had done. Learning the terrible news, the elder Hollendorfer fell into a deep depression, became seriously ill, and soon died. All this time, his family had been covering for the criminal. This explained the incredible hospitality and cooperation that Betty and Joel displayed during the farm search. Everything was done to avoid raising further suspicion. On February 3, 2022, another search was conducted at the suspect's home and property. This time, the farm was thoroughly dug up. Subsequently, human remains were found in a pit 2 meters deep. 4 days later, the 47-year-old man was arrested. Later analysis confirmed that the found corpse belonged to the sought-after Kara Nichols. Essentially, only her bones remained. However, thanks to modern technology, the girl was successfully identified: the defendant. During interrogation, the man didn't break down immediately. Eventually, however, he confessed that he had not intended to end the girl's life. He had indeed found her on an intimacy services website. On October 9th, he called her and arranged a meeting, after which he picked her up from her home. Intimacy occurred in his old car. Everything was fine until, in a moment of passion, the man began to strangle his companion. Once Joel realized that Kara had lost consciousness, he stopped. Initially, he tried to administer first aid, but it was too late. Kara was already deceased. Frightened, the criminal drove her to his family farm and buried her in the first grave he found. He moved the body several times and eventually buried it where his mother's favorite horse was interred. This explained why the search dogs were confused by the scents. Moreover, during the initial search, this particular area had not been inspected. Soon, Joel Hollendorfer was charged with first-degree murder and tampering with evidence. Meanwhile, Betty denied any knowledge of the crime committed by her son, asserting that she had always cooperated with the investigation and genuinely believed in his innocence. Justice. The hearings took place in the summer of 2023. The prosecution insisted that the defendant had intentionally committed the crime, thus realizing his sinister fantasies. At the same time, forensic experts could not provide detailed information about the victim's death. However, based on the fact that Kara's hyoid bone was broken, asphyxiation was named as the cause of death. Experts claimed that one cannot accidentally strangle someone to death. There is always time to reconsider and stop. Another factor considered was the victim's state under the influence of banned substances. Hollendorfer's defense argued that Nichols's death was due to asphyxiation from which she could not recover. Under similar circumstances, the likelihood of recovery for a healthy person is significantly higher than for a substance-dependent individual. As depicted during the trial, an entrenched addict, which the victim was portrayed to be, would have no chance of survival. This was explained by the long-term effects of banned substances on the human body. Unfortunately, it was impossible to confirm or refute the lawyer's statements over time. The Nichols family was extremely upset by how their daughter was portrayed. Kara's father noted that this judgment negated any sympathy from the jurors and depicted her as an unworthy victim. Nonetheless, during the trial, Joel did not appear remorseful. Some observed that he even smiled at times. Ultimately, the defendant's actions were reclassified to second-degree murder. He was found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to 24 years in prison. The sentence did not satisfy the victim's family, who had hoped for a life sentence for the perpetrator. Moreover, due to insufficient evidence, no one else was punished. Julia and Paul Nichols called the process a complete miscarriage of justice. The bereaved parents hope that despite the numerous labels attached to their daughter, Kara's friends and acquaintances will remember her positively, not just as sensational news. She was a teenager who battled with mental health issues but was cruelly dehumanized, concluded the girl's mother about the investigation and trial process. Do you think justice was fully served in the case of Kara Nichols' disappearance and death?